My name is Gideon Vance. For 5 years, I was the silent, invisible pillar holding up my son's beautiful, expensive life. He and his wife thought their success was their own. They never knew that every month, I was the one who made sure the bank didn't come knocking on their door. So when they told me I wasn't welcome for Christmas, they thought they were just sidelining an old man. They didn't realize they were also firing their financier. A few weeks later, my phone lit up with 28 missed calls. The bill, it turned out, had finally come due. Before I tell you how it all fell apart, do me a favor and let me know in the comments where you're listening to this story from. And if you believe that a parent's love should be met with respect, not taken for granted, please hit that like button and subscribe. It all started on a Saturday afternoon in early December. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across my small, quiet living room in Atlanta. The air smelled of lemon oil and old wood, a scent of a life lived with care. I had the box open on the coffee table, the one I'd built from cedar a lifetime ago. Inside, nestled in soft, worn-out flannel cloths, were the ornaments. These were not the shiny plastic things you buy at a big box store. These were my life's work, in a way. A small, carved wooden angel, its wings worn smooth from 50 years of being held by my late wife, Serena. A little rocking horse with a missing ear, the first one my son Malik had ever painted. A tiny, intricate snowflake, the last piece I had carved my hands a little stiffer, now the lines not quite as sharp as they used to be. Every year on the first Saturday of December, I would take them out. I would clean them, polish them with a soft cloth, and remember the Christmas they came from. It was a tradition. In a world that was always rushing forward, it was my anchor. I was a construction foreman for 45 years. I built houses, bridges, things that were meant to last, and that's how I saw my family. Something you build with your own hands, with patience and with strength, something that is supposed to stand against any storm. As I polished the little angel, I found myself listening, waiting for the sound of my phone. Every Saturday around 4 o'clock, Malik would call. It was another one of our traditions. We'd talk about the falcons, about the neighbors, about the leaky faucet I was meaning to fix. It was the anchor of my week. And just like clockwork, the phone began to ring. I smiled a small, private smile. Some things at least you could still count on. I picked up the phone. "Hey there, son," I said, my voice full of a warmth I had been saving up all week. "Hey, Dad." Malik's voice came through, but it was different. Usually, it was a broad, easy sound full of the confidence of a man who was doing well in the world. Today, it was tight, stretched thin, like a wire pulled too taut. "Everything all right?" I asked, my fatherly instincts kicking in immediately. "You sound a little tired." "Oh yeah, no, everything's fine," he said a little too quickly. "Just busy, you know how it is. End of the year trying to close out some big projects." We talked for a few minutes, the usual small talk. But the tension in his voice never went away. It was there just beneath the surface, a low, discordant hum. Finally, I couldn't wait any longer. "So," I said, my voice full of a cheerful anticipation I did not feel. "I was just polishing up the old ornaments, thinking about the tree. I figure I'll drive up to your place the weekend before Christmas like we always do. Give us a few days to get everything ready for the big day." The silence on the other end of the line was not a normal pause. It was a dead, heavy silence, a void. I could hear him breathing a soft, nervous sound. "Malik," I said, a cold knot beginning to form in the pit of my stomach. "Son, you there?" "Yeah, Dad," he finally said, his voice a low, uncomfortable murmur. "I'm here. Listen, about Christmas." He hesitated, and I could practically hear him struggling, searching for the right words, the words that would soften the blow he was about to deliver. "Ashley and I, we were talking, and this year, we're just going to do something a little quieter." The lie was so obvious, so poorly constructed, it was almost insulting. The old grandfather clock in the hall had just begun to chime 4 when the phone rang, as reliable as the sun. I smiled, setting the small, half-polished wooden angel down on its soft cloth. Some things at least a man could still count on. I picked up the phone, my thumb swiping to answer before the second ring. "Hey there, son," I said, my voice full of a warmth I had been saving up all week. "Hey, Dad." Malik's voice came through a little distant, the sound of a man talking on a speakerphone while driving. "How's the week been treating you?" "Can't complain," I said, settling back into my armchair. "The world is still turning, and my coffee was hot this morning. How are things on your end? You sound like you're in a hurry." I could hear the faint whoosh of traffic in the background. Just busy, Dad. You know how it is. End of the year trying to close out some big projects, get all our ducks in a row before the holidays. He sounded successful, stressed but successful. It was the sound of the man I had always hoped he would become, and it made me proud. We fell into our easy, familiar rhythm, the comfortable back and forth of a father and son who have been having the same conversation for 20 years. We talked about the Falcons and their chances of making the playoffs, which we both agreed were slim to none. I told him about the new blade I had bought for my table saw, and he told me about a new client he had landed for his consulting business, a big one. I could hear the pride in his voice, and it swelled my own chest. This was what all my years of hard work had been for, to see my son stand on his own 2 feet to build a life for himself that was even better than the one I had. That's great news, son. Truly great, I said. Serena would have been so proud of you. There was a brief pause on his end. Yeah, he said softly. I hope so. Speaking of proud, I said, my voice turning cheerful, my eyes falling on the box of ornaments. I'm sitting here with all your old handiwork. Just started the annual polishing. I was thinking I'll drive up on the 20th like always. That's a Friday. It'll give us the whole weekend to get the big tree decorated before Ashley's folks get into town. I've even got a new little carving for the mantelpiece this year, a snowman with a top hat. I waited for his usual enthusiastic response. That's great, Dad, or can't wait to see it. But what came was not what I expected. What came was silence. It was only a second or two, but in the context of our easy conversation, it was a chasm. It was a dead space where an answer was supposed to be. Malik, I said, a flicker of concern touching me for the first time. Son, you there? Yeah, he finally said, but his voice had changed completely. The confident, successful businessman was gone. In his place was a hesitant, uncomfortable stranger. Yeah, Dad, I'm here. Listen, about Christmas. The knot in my stomach, which had been dormant, gave a cold, hard clench. What about it? I asked, my voice still light, trying to pretend I hadn't noticed the sudden shift in the weather. Well, you see, he stammered the words, clumsy, tripping over each other. Things are just, they're a little crazy this year. Really hectic. Ashley has, well, she has a lot planned. Her sister is coming in from California with the kids, and her parents are staying for the whole week, and the house is just, it's going to be packed. We're still trying to figure out the schedule, you know. He was talking fast, a torrent of words that said nothing at all. It was a smoke screen, and the frantic way he was deploying it told me he was trying to hide something. The foreman in me, the part that had listened to 1,000 flimsy excuses from 1,000 lazy workers, recognized it immediately. This was the sound of a man who was not telling the truth. My first thought was not of betrayal. It was of concern. Was he in some kind of trouble? Hectic, I said, my voice full of a genuine offer to help. Son, that's the whole point of me coming. I'm coming to help. It's no trouble. I can put up the outside lights. I can help you with the tree. I can stay out of the way when Ashley's family is there, whatever you and Ashley need. You know me. My offer, which was meant to be a lifeline, seemed to make him panic even more. No, Dad, it's not that, he said quickly, his voice strained. It's more complicated. Look, I'm sorry I'm about to go into a tunnel. The signal is breaking up. Can I call you back about it? I've got to jump on another call right after this anyway. It was the classic brush-off the kind a busy executive gives to a persistent salesman. I had never in 42 years been a salesman to my own son. The line went quiet for a moment, and I heard the faint, clear sound of a woman's voice in the background, sharp and impatient. And then the call ended. I sat there holding the phone, listening to the dial tone. The warmth of the conversation, the easy connection was gone, replaced by a cold, unsettling feeling. It was the feeling of a door being gently but firmly closed in my face. I looked down at the small carved angel in my hand, its wooden face smiling up at me. But for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like smiling back. The phone call, which had begun with the easy warmth of a weekly tradition, had become a cold and awkward affair. My son Malik was hemming and hawing, his voice full of a strange, nervous energy as he tried to brush off my offer to come and help with the Christmas preparations. He was a bad liar. I had always known that about him. As a boy, his tells were obvious. He'd refuse to make eye contact, he'd shift his weight from foot to foot. Over the phone, the tells were different but just as clear. His voice got a little higher. He started using filler words. And he talked too fast, as if he could build a wall of words so quickly that I couldn't possibly see the truth hiding behind it. "The signal is fine, Malik," I said, my voice quiet but firm, cutting through his lie about going into a tunnel. "I can hear you perfectly. What is it you're trying to say, son? Just say it." There was another one of those heavy, painful silences. I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head as he tried to construct another more plausible excuse. It's the house, Dad," he finally stammered. "It's going to be so full this year. You know Ashley's sister Jennifer? She's coming in from California with all 3 of her kids, and Ashley's parents are going to be staying in the guest room for the whole week. There's literally no space. We'll be sleeping on top of each other as it is." I sat in my armchair, my own house empty and quiet, and I thought of their house. The house I had co-signed for. The 5-bedroom, 4-bathroom monstrosity with a finished basement that Ashley had called their forever home. The house where I had on more than one occasion slept on the perfectly comfortable pull-out sofa in the downstairs office after a late night of babysitting or helping with a project. No space. That wasn't the truth. "And," he continued, his voice gaining a desperate momentum, "you know how Ashley's parents can be. They're a little particular. They have their own traditions, their own way of doing things. Ashley just wants everything to be absolutely perfect for them this year. No stress, no complications." I thought of Ashley's parents, a pleasant, quiet couple from Ohio. Her father and I had spent the better part of the last 4 Christmases talking about football and old cars. Her mother had once spent an entire hour asking me how I carved the little wooden reindeers for my Christmas village. They were not particular. They were just people. No complications. That wasn't the truth either. "In fact," he said, throwing one last desperate excuse onto the pile, "we were just thinking of having a really small, quiet Christmas this year. You know, scaling everything back. Just something simple. So a quiet Christmas with his sister-in-law, his 3 nephews, and both of his in-laws staying for a week. That was the opposite of a quiet Christmas. That was an invasion." He was contradicting himself now. He was drowning in his own lies, and the desperate pleading tone in his voice was an insult to us both. I had to put a stop to it. "Malik," I said, and this time the warmth was gone from my voice, replaced by the cold, hard authority of a father who has been profoundly disrespected. "Stop. Just stop talking. I am your father. I have known you for 42 years. I know when you are happy, I know when you are sad, and I know when you are lying to me. And right now, son, you are lying." The silence that followed was absolute. I had called him on it. The game was up. "Let's not disrespect each other with these flimsy stories," I continued, my voice low and steady. "Whatever it is, be a man and say it to me straight. Look me in the eye, so to speak, and tell me the truth." I paused, and then I asked the question that had been hanging in the air since the moment he first hesitated. "Are you telling me that I am not invited to your home for Christmas?" I waited. I could hear his unsteady breathing. I could hear the faint sound of a car horn in the background of his call. He was trapped. There were no more excuses to hide behind, no more smokescreens. There was only my question, a simple, direct, and terrible question that demanded a simple, direct, and terrible answer. Finally, his voice came so quiet it was barely a whisper. It was the voice of a little boy who had been caught with his hand in the cookie jar, the voice of a man drowning in his own weakness. "Just for this year, Dad." He breathed the words full of a shame that was almost palpable. "I'm so sorry. It's complicated. Ashley wants..." He couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I felt the last of my hope wither and die. "I see," I said. And in those 2 words I poured a lifetime of disappointment. He had made his choice. He had chosen his wife's desire for a perfect Christmas over his own father. "Dad, please try to understand," he began, but I couldn't listen to any more. I couldn't listen to him try to justify the unjustifiable. "I have to go, son," I said, my voice as empty as my heart. And I ended the call. I hung up the phone on my only child, and I was left alone in the quiet room with the ghosts of 1,000 Christmases past and the cold, hard reality of the Christmas that would never be. The confession, when it finally came, was a pathetic, wounded sound. A whispered yes from a 42-year-old man who sounded like a guilty child. My son. The silence that followed was a chasm of my own disappointment. I had raised him to be a man of integrity, a man who stood for something, a man who faced his obligations head on. And here he was, cowering on the other end of a phone line, having just traded his own father for a quiet life and a happy wife. The pain of the rejection was sharp, but the pain of my disappointment in him was a deeper, duller ache. "Dad, please," he began again, his voice a low, desperate plea. He was trying to repair the damage, to smooth over the wound he had just inflicted. "Please try to understand. It's not like that. It's not about you. It's just... Ashley feels very strongly about it. Her parents, you know, they're getting older, and she just wants one perfect, flawless Christmas for them. The house is going to be so chaotic with her sister's kids, and she's so stressed. She's been planning this for months." He was still talking, but I was barely listening. All I could hear was, "Ashley wants, Ashley feels, Ashley's parents." He was talking about his wife's desires, his wife's stress, his wife's family. Where in any of this was his own father, I had become a complication, a logistical problem to be managed in his wife's grand, perfect plan. He was still stammering, still trying to build a flimsy wall of excuses for me to climb. "It's just for this 1 year, Dad, I promise," he said, the lie sounding thin even to his own ears. "Next year, everything will go back to normal. We'll get the biggest tree they have, and you can come up for a whole week. It'll be great." And then I heard it. It was not loud. It was a sound from the background of the call, the sound he thought I wouldn't be able to hear. It was her voice, Ashley's. It was not a shout. It was a sharp, impatient, and commanding whisper, the kind a person uses to correct a disobedient dog that is embarrassing them in public. "Malik," she hissed, her voice cutting through the phone line like a razor blade. "Are you done yet? For heaven's sake, just tell him so we can move on." And there it was, the truth. Not the stammered, shameful, watered-down version my son had been trying to sell me, but the pure, unadulterated truth. "Just tell him." The words dripped with a cold, dismissive impatience. This wasn't a painful family negotiation to her. This was an inconvenient task on her to-do list, and her husband was taking too long to complete it. She didn't see me as a father-in-law to be respected. She saw me as an obstacle to be removed. In that single, clarifying moment, the pain in my heart crystallized into something else entirely. It was a cold, hard, and perfectly clear anger. My son was not the architect of this betrayal. He was just the messenger boy, the weak-willed puppet sent to do his master's bidding. The hurt I felt for his rejection was suddenly overshadowed by a profound, terrible pity for his weakness and a deep, simmering rage for the woman who was so casually and cruelly pulling his strings. She was not just his wife. She was his handler. And her project was to slowly, methodically sever the ties that connected him to his past, to his family, to me, so that he could be remade into the perfect accessory for the perfect life she was designing. On the other end of the line, Malik, having heard his wife's command, and knowing that I had likely heard it too, fell silent. He was exposed. I have to go, Dad," he finally stammered, his voice thick with a new, deeper layer of shame. "I see," I said. And this time the words were not just full of disappointment in him. They were full of a new, cold understanding of the real enemy. This was not a misunderstanding between a father and a son. This was a silent war being waged by my daughter-in-law, and she had just fired the first shot. "Goodbye, Malik," I said, and I ended the call. The real battle was not with my son. It was for him. And I, a man who had never backed down from a fight in his life, was not about to start now. The final click of the phone ending the call was a small, insignificant sound, but it echoed in my quiet living room like a slamming door, a door to my own family. I sat there in my armchair, the phone resting in my lap, feeling the warmth of its battery slowly fade. The connection was severed, the conversation was over, and a tradition that had been the bedrock of my life for more than 40 years was dead. The initial anger I had felt upon hearing my daughter-in-law's voice, that sharp, cold fury, had already burned itself out. In its place was something much heavier, a deep, profound, and weary sorrow. It was the grief of a man who suddenly realizes he is a stranger in his own life story. The son I had raised, the man I was so proud of, had been reduced to a stammering messenger, a man so afraid of his own wife that he could not even find the courage to be honest with his own father. It was a disappointment so vast, it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. My gaze fell upon the coffee table. It was covered in the ghosts of 1,000 Christmases past. The little wooden ornaments, each one a chapter in our family's history, were spread out on their soft flannel cloths, waiting to be polished, waiting for their moment to shine. They looked different now. They were no longer symbols of joy and continuity. They were relics of a life that no longer existed, artifacts from a forgotten time, when I was not just a father, but a welcome part of my own family. Slowly I stood up. My movements felt stiff, the movements of an old man. I walked over to the table. I looked down at the small carved angel, the one with the wings worn smooth by my late wife's hands. Serena had loved this one most of all. Every year she was the one who got to place it at the very top of the tree. I could see her face in my mind's eye, her smile lit by the twinkling Christmas lights, her eyes full of a wisdom I had never fully appreciated until now. She would have seen this coming. She had seen the weakness in Malik, the cold ambition in Ashley. She had tried to warn me, and I, in my pride and my blind love, had not listened. With a hand that felt strangely steady, I picked up the angel. I didn't polish it. I just held it for a moment, then gently wrapped it in its flannel cloth, a tiny shroud. I placed it back in the cedar box. Next, I picked up the rocking horse, the one with the clumsy, vibrant colors a 6-year-old Malik had painted with such intense concentration. I remembered that day. I remembered the smear of red paint on his nose, the look of pure, unadulterated pride on his face when he had presented it to me. "For the tree, Daddy," he had said. Where was that little boy now? Where was the man who would have been horrified at the thought of turning his own father away on Christmas? He was gone, replaced by a stranger who spoke with his wife's voice. I wrapped the horse in its cloth and placed it beside the angel. One by one, I continued the grim, quiet work. The lopsided clay star my granddaughter Imani had made in kindergarten, her tiny thumbprint still visible on the back. The intricate snowflake I had carved the first Christmas after Serena had passed, pouring all my grief and my love into the delicate, precise cuts. The simple, blocky reindeer from my own childhood. Each ornament was a memory. Each memory was a fresh stab of pain, and with each one I wrapped and put away, I felt a small piece of my own heart being packed away with it. This was not an act of anger. It was a funeral. I was burying a lifetime of tradition. I was burying the father I used to be, the man who was always welcome, always needed. My son's words echoed in my head. "Just for this year, Dad." He had said it to soften the blow, to offer a false hope of reconciliation. But I knew better. Ashley had not gone to all this trouble for a temporary solution. This was not a pause. This was a severing. When the last ornament was wrapped and placed in the box, I gently closed the lid. The scent of cedar, which had always smelled of Christmas and of home, now smelled of finality. I picked up the box. I didn't put it back in the hall closet where it was easy to reach. I carried it through the house, my footsteps echoing in the silence, and I opened the door to the attic. I pulled down the rickety ladder and climbed the box, held carefully in one arm. I placed it in the far, dusty corner behind old suitcases and forgotten furniture. I was putting it somewhere it would not be easily found. I was putting it somewhere it would not be a temptation next year. I came back down and closed the attic door. The living room felt empty now, stripped of its festive purpose. The joy and anticipation of the holiday season were gone, replaced by a cold, hard, and unfamiliar resolve. The pain was still there, a massive, silent weight in my chest. But the man who had packed away those memories was not the same man who had taken them out. The hopeful father was gone. In his place was a man who had finally painfully seen the truth. I hung up the phone, and the silence that rushed in was a physical thing. It was a cold, heavy blanket that settled over me, smothering the last of the festive warmth in the room. The cedar box, now closed, sat on the coffee table like a small coffin. A coffin for a family tradition. A coffin for the son I thought I knew. I had to get out of the house. The quiet walls, which had always been a comfort, now felt like they were closing in witnesses to my fresh and profound humiliation. I grabbed my keys and my old work jacket, and I just started driving. I had no destination in mind. I just drove through the familiar streets of Atlanta, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my mind a numb, gray fog. The phone call replayed in my head, a cruel, endless loop. My son's stammering excuses, my daughter-in-law's sharp, impatient whisper. Just tell him so we can move on. Moving on. That's what I was to them now. An obstacle to be moved on from. My truck, as if having a mind of its own, took the old familiar turns. It led me away from the busy main roads and into the quiet, tree-lined streets of a neighborhood I hadn't visited in years. It pulled up alongside Grant Park, its old oaks standing like silent skeletal sentinels in the December chill. I cut the engine. This was where Serena and I used to walk back when our legs were stronger and our worries were smaller. This was where we had pushed Malik on the swings, his small legs kicking at the sky, his laughter the most beautiful music in the world. I got out of the truck and walked over to a specific bench, the one under the big magnolia tree, its wood worn smooth by time and memory. Our bench. I sat down, the cold of the wood seeping through my jacket. A few families were at the playground, their children's bright coats a splash of color against the gray afternoon. I watched a young father push his daughter on a swing, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated joy. And the memory which had been hiding just beneath the surface of my pain finally broke through. It was the day of Malik and Ashley's wedding 15 years ago. The reception was a loud, lavish affair at a fancy downtown hotel, something far grander than Serena and I had ever had. The music was thumping and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and champagne. Serena and I had slipped out onto a small balcony to catch our breath, to find a moment of quiet in the middle of the storm. We stood there looking through the glass doors at the party inside. We could see Malik and Ashley on the dance floor laughing, caught in their own world. "Look at him, Serena," I had said, my chest swelling with a father's pride. "He looks so happy. She's a beautiful girl." Serena, who was leaning against the railing, didn't answer right away. "Yes, she is beautiful," she finally said, her voice soft and thoughtful. "And she has made our son very happy tonight." There was a but in her voice, a quiet reservation that I didn't want to hear on such a happy day. "But what?" I had prompted, a little annoyed. She turned to look at me. Her eyes, those wise, perceptive eyes that had always seen the world more clearly than I did, were full of a deep and complicated love for our son. "You see that look in her eyes, Gideon?" she asked. "The way she looks around the room, the way she assesses everything. That's a look I know. It's the look of someone who is always calculating, always looking for the next better thing. Our boy, he has a good heart and a strong back. He will give her everything he has. He would tear down the moon and the stars for her if she asked." She paused, and then she delivered the words that had come back to haunt me tonight. "My only worry, my love, is that for a girl like that, everything he has will never be enough. She will always want more than he can give." "Oh, Serena," I had said, laughing, trying to dismiss her concerns. "Don't be so hard on the girl. It's their wedding day. They're in love. Just let them be happy." I was the proud father, the optimist, the man who wanted to believe in the fairy tale. She had just shaken her head, a small, sad smile on her face, and looked back through the window. "I hope you're right, Gideon," she had whispered. "I truly do." Now sitting on that cold park bench, an old lonely man, her words echoed in my mind not as a warning, but as a prophecy that had been fulfilled. Serena had seen it from the very beginning. She had seen the hunger in Ashley, the ambition that would never be satisfied. The uninvitation to Christmas, it wasn't a sudden whim. It was the logical conclusion of a 15-year project. A project to elevate her own status, to build a perfect, curated life, and to slowly, methodically sand away all the rough, working-class edges of my son's past. And I, with my calloused hands and my simple, honest life, was the biggest, roughest edge of all. The pain of the rejection was still there, but now it was mixed with the profound, aching grief of missing my wife's wisdom. She had seen the storm coming, and I had been too busy admiring the clear blue sky to listen. The cold that seeped into my bones was not just from the winter air. It was the cold of a man who finally understands that he is utterly and completely alone in his fight. But in that understanding, a new resolve began to form. This wasn't just about my wounded pride anymore. It was about honoring Serena's memory. It was about standing up for the simple, honest values she had seen so clearly were under attack. She would not have wanted me to go quietly. She would have wanted me to fight. And so I would. The cold of the park bench had seeped deep into my bones, but I didn't move. Dusk was beginning to settle, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gray. The families at the playground had packed up and gone home, and I was left alone with the ghosts of the past and the cold, hard reality of the present. To understand how a father could be erased from his own family's Christmas, you have to understand how that family was built. And the truth is, the house my son lived in, the very stage for his perfect life, was built on a foundation of my love and his ambition. And it all started 5 years ago at my own kitchen table. The memory is as clear as a pane of glass. It was a Sunday, and Malik and Ashley had come over for dinner, a weekly tradition we still had back then. I had made my famous pot roast, and the house was filled with the warm, comforting smell of a slow-cooked meal. Malik was practically vibrating with an energy I hadn't seen in him since he was a boy who had just won a big game. He was 37 years old, and he had a dream. "Dad," he had said, leaning over the table, his eyes blazing with excitement. He spread a set of professionally printed brochures out between the salt and pepper shakers. "This is it. Vance Consulting. I'm finally doing it. I'm going out on my own." I looked at the brochures. They were slick and impressive. He had a logo, a business plan, a list of potential clients he had been cultivating for months. For years, he had been working for a big downtown firm making other people rich. Now he wanted to build something for himself. I felt a surge of pure, uncut pride. This was my son. A builder just like his old man, only he was building with ideas instead of wood and concrete. "This is wonderful, son," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Your mother would have been so proud." Ashley, who had been watching him with a look of intense proprietary pride, then spoke up. "It's more than just a business, Gideon," she said, her voice smooth and polished. "It's a brand, and for a brand like this to succeed, it needs to project success from day one." She slid her tablet across the table, and on the screen was a picture of a house. But it wasn't just a house. It was a statement. It was a massive modern structure of glass and steel and sharp angles, the kind of place you see in architecture magazines. It was perched on a hill in one of those new exclusive suburbs north of the city with a panoramic view of the skyline. It was cold and beautiful, and it looked like it cost a fortune. "We found it," she said, her voice full of a reverence that was almost religious. "This isn't just a home, Gideon. It's an asset. It's our headquarters. Imagine hosting a networking event for potential clients here by the pool. Imagine the impression it will make. People want to work with someone who is already successful. You have to look the part to get the part. It's an investment in our future." Malik was nodding eagerly, caught up in her vision. "She's right, Dad. This is the kind of place that says, 'We've arrived.' It's the key to landing the big accounts." I looked at the picture of the house, then at my son's hopeful, shining face. I was a practical man. I had spent a lifetime with blueprints and budgets. I knew what things cost, and I knew, with a sinking certainty, what a house like that would cost. "Son," I said, my voice gentle, "this is a beautiful house. It's also at least $1 million house. You're just starting out. How in the world can you afford something like this?" Ashley was the one who answered, her smile unwavering. "We've run the numbers, Gideon. With the projected income from Malik's first few contracts and alone, it's tight, but it's doable. You have to spend money to make money. It's a different world now." Malik then leaned in, his voice dropping, his eyes pleading. This was the moment that hooked me, the moment he stopped talking like a businessman and started talking like a son. "Dad, this is my one big shot," he said. "I know it's a risk, I know it's a stretch, but I have to take it. All my life I've played it safe. I took the safe job I got, the safe promotions. This is my one chance to build something that is really mine. I need you to believe in me." And there it was. It wasn't about the house anymore. It wasn't about the money. It was about my son asking for my blessing, asking for my faith. How could a father say no to that? I remembered my own struggles, the years of scraping by to build my own small life. I had always wanted his path to be easier. My heart, the foolish, loving heart of a father, overrode the cautious, calculating mind of a builder. I looked at the picture of the cold glass house. I looked at my son's passionate, dreaming face. And I looked at my daughter-in-law's sharp, expectant one. And I knew that I would do whatever it took to help him. I just didn't realize at the time what the true cost would be. The memory of that Sunday dinner of my son selling me his dream was the first link in the chain. The second link was forged a week later, not at my warm kitchen table, but in a cold, sterile cubicle at a downtown bank. My son's dream was about to collide with reality, and reality came in the form of a tired, middle-aged loan officer named Mr. Henderson. Malik had asked me to come along for moral support, he'd said. At the time, I thought it was a sweet gesture, a son wanting his father's presence at a big moment. Now I see it for what it was, the first step in a negotiation, a way to have me already at the table when the time came to ask for what they really wanted. We sat in 3 uncomfortable chairs, the air smelling of stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. Mr. Henderson's desk was a monument to orderly, impersonal finance. It was covered in neat stacks of paper, a multi-line telephone, and a large computer monitor displaying columns of numbers. Malik and Ashley were dressed to the nines. My son wore a suit that was a little too tight in the shoulders, a look of nervous, hopeful energy buzzing around him. Ashley wore a sharp, expensive-looking dress, her face a mask of confident expectation, as if the loan's approval were a mere formality. I was just there in my clean work pants and a pressed shirt, a relic from a different world. Mr. Henderson began with a series of polite, practiced smiles. "Well, folks," he said, tapping a thick file on his desk, "I've had a chance to go over all your paperwork. Mr. Vance," he said to Malik, "I have to say your business plan is very impressive, ambitious. Your projections for the first 2 years are very optimistic." The word optimistic hung in the air, a polite corporate word for unrealistic. "We believe in what Malik is building," Ashley said quickly, leaning forward, her voice a smooth, confident purr. "The potential is enormous, but to attract the high-end clients he's targeting, we need the right brand, the right image." Mr. Henderson nodded, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "I understand the theory of projecting success, I truly do. But my job and the bank's job is to assess risk based on current, verifiable reality." He turned a page in the file and his tone became more clinical. "And the reality, folks, is in your debt-to-income ratio. Based on your last 2 years of tax returns, Mr. Vance, your verifiable income combined with Mrs. Vance's simply cannot support a mortgage of this size, not even close. The monthly payment on $1 million home with taxes and insurance would be more than your current take-home pay. The underwriters would never approve a loan like this." The confidence on Ashley's face wavered, replaced by a look of sharp, impatient disbelief. "But don't you see," she argued, her smooth voice gaining a hard edge, "the house is the key to the income. We can't get the high-end clients without the high-end image. You have to look at it as a marketing expense and investment." Mr. Henderson gave another one of his weary professional smiles. He had heard this argument 1,000 times from 1,000 different dreamers. "Ma'am, with all due respect, the bank doesn't lend money based on marketing theories. We lend based on a documented ability to repay. Your future income is a projection. It is not a fact, and we can only deal in facts." Malik, who had been silent, finally spoke up, his voice full of a desperate, passionate sincerity. "Mr. Henderson," he pleaded, "I understand the numbers look tough, but you have to understand I will not fail. I will work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to make this business a success. I'll do whatever it takes. I just need the chance. I just need the bank to believe in me." The loan officer's expression softened for a moment. He looked at my son, and I think he saw a glimpse of the good, hard-working man underneath the foolish ambition. "Son," he said, his voice kind but firm, "I have no doubt about your work ethic. I can see the passion in your eyes, and I wish you all the success in the world." He then closed the file on his desk, a gesture of quiet finality. "But the numbers are the numbers, and my personal feelings don't change what the underwriting guidelines will allow. I'm very sorry, but at this time the bank cannot approve this loan. It is simply too much risk." The rejection, as polite and professional as it was absolute. The air went out of the room. I watched as my son's face, which had been so full of hope and excitement just minutes before, seemed to collapse. The light in his eyes went out, replaced by the dull gray look of failure and humiliation. He had put his dream on the table and it had been rejected. He just stared at the closed file, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Ashley's reaction was different. Her disappointment was not quiet. It was a cold, hard anger. Her face was a mask of fury, her lips pressed into a thin white line. Her perfect plan had just been derailed by a man in a cheap suit, and she was radiating a silent, venomous rage. The walk out of the bank and into the bright afternoon sun was one of the longest of my life. The 3 of us didn't say a word. Malik was crushed. Ashley was furious. And I was watching my son's dream die. A part of me, the practical builder, the man who knew the cost of things, was relieved. But the father in me, the man who had just witnessed his child's spirit be broken, felt an overpowering urge to fix it, to make the pain go away. It was a feeling I knew well. It was the feeling that had guided my hand for 50 years. And it was the feeling that was about to lead me and my son down a very dangerous road. The memory of that bank meeting of my son's crushed and broken spirit is the one that haunts me the most. A man can endure his own failures, but to witness the failure of your child, to see the bright, hopeful light in their eyes extinguish right in front of you, that is a pain of a different kind. It is a pain a father is biologically programmed to try and fix. And in that moment, sitting in the back of my own truck in a bank parking lot, I made a decision. A decision born not of logic or wisdom, but of pure, unadulterated, and foolish fatherly love. A decision that would set the stage for all the heartbreak that was to come. The ride back from the bank was a tomb of silence. Ashley sat in the passenger seat, rigid with a cold, silent fury, staring out the window at a world that had dared to deny her what she wanted. Malik sat behind me, and in the rearview mirror I could see his reflection. He was just staring down at his own hands, his shoulders slumped, a picture of utter defeat. The confident, ambitious entrepreneur who had walked into that bank an hour ago had vanished. In his place was a man who had just been told his dream was worthless. I couldn't stand it. The sight of his despair was a physical weight on my chest. I thought of my own struggles, the years of hard labor, the constant worry, the sacrifices Serena and I had made to give this boy a better life. Was it all for nothing? To watch him give up now? I pulled the truck over to the side of the road with a sudden jolt. "Ashley," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Would you give me and my son a minute, please?" She turned to look at me, her eyes full of a sharp, questioning anger. But she saw the look on my face, and for once she didn't argue. She just got out of the truck and stood on the sidewalk, her back to us, a stiff and impatient statue. I turned in my seat to face Malik. "Son," I said, "look at me." He slowly lifted his head. His eyes were red. "This isn't over," I told him. "That man in the bank, he's just a man who reads numbers on a page. He doesn't know you. He doesn't know your heart. He doesn't know your work ethic. I do." A flicker of something, a tiny spark of hope appeared in his eyes. "But he's right, Dad," he whispered, his voice thick with shame. "The numbers don't work. We can't afford it." "The numbers can be made to work," I said. "There's another way. I'll co-sign for you." His eyes widened, and the hope was immediately replaced by a fresh wave of shame. "Dad, no," he said, shaking his head. "I can't ask you to do that. It's too much. It's too much risk for you. What if I fail? I could ruin you." "You are my son," I said, my voice a low rumble full of a conviction that came from the very core of my being. "Your dream is my dream, and you are not going to fail. We will make this work, but we have to be smart about it." The next day I went back to the bank alone. I sat down with Mr. Henderson again. "I'm going to co-sign the loan for my son," I told him. He nodded, not surprised. He'd seen this 100 times before. "But," I continued, "I have a condition. I am 70 years old. I have my own home, my own credit, my own retirement. I cannot risk any of that if my son and his ambition gets busy and misses a payment. It cannot happen, not even once." Mr. Henderson leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen on his desk. "There is a way, Mr. Vance," he said, his voice thoughtful. "It's a bit unorthodox, but it's perfectly legal and it would protect you completely. We can structure the loan with you as the co-signer, which satisfies the bank's security requirement. Then we can set up a separate dedicated escrow account. This account will be in your name. The automatic monthly mortgage payment will be debited only from that dedicated account, not from your son's." I listened, the gears turning in my own mind. "So, as long as I keep that account funded," I said, "the payment will never be late." "Never," he confirmed. "It completely insulates your personal credit score from any youthful oversight. You would have total control." It was the perfect solution. It allowed me to give my son his dream while protecting myself from his potential irresponsibility. It was a father's love wrapped in a lawyer's caution. I agreed on the spot. We drew up the papers. When I told Malik and Ashley, I framed it as a gift. "It's all taken care of." I had told them, radiating a confidence I hoped was contagious. "I've made a special arrangement with the bank. The payments will be handled automatically, so you don't even have to think about it. You just focus on building your business." Malik was overwhelmed with gratitude, hugging me so tight he almost cracked a rib. Ashley was just relieved her dream house now a reality. They were so blinded by their own good fortune that they never asked for the details. They never questioned the mechanics of the special arrangement. They just accepted the gift. As I sat there in the bank signing my name on that final piece of paper, I thought I was being a good father. I thought I was being clever, protecting my son and myself at the same time. I didn't realize what I was actually doing. I was not just co-signing a loan. I was taking on the entire secret burden of his dream. I was building him a beautiful house on a foundation of illusion. I was handing him a life he wasn't really living, and I was calling it a gift. It was the single greatest mistake of my life, a loving, terrible mistake that would take 5 long years to finally come due. My decision at the bank that day, the decision to become the secret silent payer of my son's mortgage, was the biggest mistake of my life. But it was a mistake that required 2 other people to make it work. A lie this big cannot be maintained by one person alone. It needs the willing, or at the very least, the willfully blind participation of others. People often ask, how could they not have known? How could 2 intelligent, educated people not notice that a payment the size of a small car was not leaving their bank account every single month for 5 years? The answer is as simple as it is sad. They didn't know because they didn't want to know. They were too busy living the dream to ever inspect the foundations it was built upon. And I, with my quiet monthly payments, was the one who made sure those foundations never shook enough to draw their attention. You have to understand their mindset. They were not just a married couple. They were the co-founders of a startup, and that startup was their own life. Malik was the CEO, the visionary. His focus was entirely on the front end of the business, chasing clients, networking, making deals, bringing money in. He saw the deposits hitting their joint account, the large sums from his consulting fees, and he saw it as proof that his gamble was paying off. He was a success. He wasn't a numbers guy when it came to his own life. He assumed the back end was running smoothly. He had signed papers at the bank to set up an automatic draft for the mortgage. Why would he ever need to check on it? To do so would have felt like a waste of time that could be better spent landing the next big client. More than that, it would have felt like doubt. And Malik was terrified of doubting himself. Ashley, on the other hand, was the chief marketing officer of their shared life. Her job was not to worry about where the money came from, but where it went. Her focus was on the outflow, on spending the money in a way that projected the image of success they so desperately craved. She was the curator of their illusion. She was the one picking out the $1,000 light fixtures, the Italian leather sofa, the tickets for their summer trip to Tuscany. Her measure of success was whether the American Express card went through without a problem. As long as the checking account had a healthy balance and the credit was flowing, the details were boring, irrelevant. She was the director of a grand performance, and she had no interest in seeing what was happening behind the curtain. Their finances were a river. Malik was focused on the headwaters, the sources of the income. Ashley was focused on the estuary where the river met the sea of luxury goods. Neither of them ever bothered to look at the river itself to see how fast the current was really moving, to see that a huge portion of its volume was being secretly piped in from an outside source. Me. Their willful blindness was a daily practice. I can picture it perfectly. A bank statement would arrive in the mail, a thick, intimidating envelope. Ashley would pick it up, glance at it with disdain, and toss it directly into the shredder without even opening it. "It's all online, honey," she would say if Malik asked. "Who needs all this paper clutter?" But they never went online, not really. They would log in, see the 5-figure balance in their checking account, and log out satisfied. They never clicked on the Details tab. They never downloaded a full statement. To do so would have been to invite a truth they were not prepared to face, that the numbers didn't add up, that they were living far, far beyond their means. I was the safety net that made their high-wire act possible. By guaranteeing that the single largest, most important bill was always paid, I removed the primary source of financial anxiety from their lives. I took away the natural consequences that would have forced them to be more careful. I gave them a false sense of security so complete that they never felt the need to look down. My love, my quiet secret sacrifice, had not been a gift. It had been an anesthetic numbing them to the reality of their own precarious situation. And so, for 5 years, the illusion held. They hosted lavish parties in their beautiful glass house, confident in their success. They traveled the world secure in their financial stability. They moved through their lives with the easy, unburdened confidence of people who believed they had earned it all. They never knew that their entire life was a carefully constructed fiction, and I was its silent and most foolish author. A few days later, I drove out to Lake Lanier, my old fishing rods rattling in the back of my truck. The sky was a high, clear blue, and the air was cold and sharp. It was a perfect day for thinking. And I wasn't going alone. When I pulled into the muddy lot by the boat ramp, my oldest and dearest friend Jamal Lewis was already there, leaning against his old truck, a thermos of coffee in his hand. Jamal and I had known each other since we were boys. We had gone from chasing girls to raising families to retiring, all in the same town. He was a retired history teacher, a man who saw the world in patterns and long arcs of cause and effect. He was sharp, cynical, and fiercely loyal. He was the only man on earth I could tell this to. We didn't speak much as we got the boat ready and motored out to our favorite quiet cove. That was the beauty of a friendship that old. The silences were as comfortable as the conversations. We cast our lines into the still, dark water, the small splash of the lures the only sound for a long time. It was Jamal who spoke first. He was like that, patient, but he knew when the silence had gone on long enough. "All right, Gideon," he said, not taking his eyes off his fishing line. "You've been quiet for 2 hours, quieter than usual. I've seen that look on your face exactly twice before. Once when Serena passed, and once when you found out Malik was moving his business into that fancy glass building you knew he couldn't afford. So, what is it this time?" I reeled my line in slowly, the rhythmic motion, a small physical comfort. "He called me last Saturday." I began, my voice a low, flat thing. "Malik, we had our usual talk, and then I mentioned Christmas." I told him everything. The stammering excuses about the house being too full, about Ashley's particular parents. My final direct question. My son's whispered shameful confession. And then the final clarifying blow, Ashley's sharp, impatient voice in the background. "Just tell him so we can move on." Jamal was silent for a long time. He reeled in his line, checked his bait, and cast it out again with a sharp flick of his wrist. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low, angry growl. "So let me get this straight," he said, his eyes hard. "You co-signed on a house you knew he couldn't afford, a house his wife picked out to impress people you don't even know. For 5 years you have been the silent, invisible pillar holding up their entire fantasy life. And now that her castle is secure, now that she's ready to play the grand lady of the manor for her own family, she has decided the old king who built the castle is no longer welcome to attend the feast." Hearing it laid out so plainly in Jamal's blunt, unforgiving words was like a punch to the gut. It was the truth stripped of all the soft, forgiving language of a father's love. "That's about the size of it," I said, my voice hoarse. "And you just accepted it?" Jamal asked, his voice incredulous. "You just said okay and hung up." "What else was I supposed to do, Jamal?" I asked, the old weariness creeping back into my voice. "Yell at him. Plead with him. He's a grown man. He made his choice." "His wife made the choice," Jamal corrected, his voice sharp as a filleting knife. "He just went along with it because that's what he does. That boy, I love him like he's my own kid, you know that, but he's always been weak where she is concerned. He's so desperate to give her the world she wants that he's forgotten the man who gave him the world in the first place." He shook his head in disgust. "This isn't new. This is a pattern. She's been building a wall around him for 15 years, brick by brick. This is just the last brick." He looked at me, his gaze intense. "You are a better man than me, Gideon. If my son did that to me after I had secured his future, I'd burn his whole world to the ground." "It's not about burning anything down," I said, though a cold fire was beginning to smolder in my own chest. "It's about respect. It's about knowing your place in your own family." "Exactly," Jamal said, pointing his fishing rod at me. "And she has shown you your place. It's outside in the cold. So the question is, Gideon, the only question that matters now. What are you going to do about it?" His question hung in the cold, still air between us. What was I going to do about it? For days, I had been drowning in the hurt, in the memory, in the disappointment. I had been looking at the past, but Jamal was right. The only thing that mattered was the future, the next move. The silence on my end had been a reaction of pain. But what if it could be something else? What if my silence could become A weapon. The thought, once it entered my mind, did not leave. My question, "What are you going to do about it?" hung in the cold, still air of the cove. It wasn't a question directed at Jamal. It was a question I was asking myself, a question I had been wrestling with since I had packed away those Christmas ornaments. I had been drowning in the past, in the hurt, in the memory of my wife's words. I hadn't allowed myself to think about the future. I didn't know how. Jamal reeled in his line with a few slow, deliberate turns of the crank. He set his fishing rod down in the boat, the light clatter a loud sound in the quiet morning. He turned to face me, his full attention now on me, not the water. His face, usually so quick to a laugh, was serious, the face of a teacher about to deliver a difficult but necessary lesson. "First of all, Gid," he began, his voice a low, steady rumble, "I want you to hear this. The way you're feeling right now, that anger, that deep, profound hurt that feels like a betrayal of your very soul, it's not just justified, it's overdue. You have every right to feel every last ounce of it. You have been played for a fool by your own family, and there's no shame in finally admitting that." His words were a strange comfort. He wasn't telling me to calm down to see it from their side. He was giving me permission to feel the rage I had been suppressing. "But the anger isn't the point," he continued, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. "The anger is just the symptom. The disease is something else entirely. Let me tell you what I see as an outsider who has been watching this play for 15 years. I see a good man, a great father, who has spent his entire life making it impossible for his son to fail. And because of that, my friend, you have made it impossible for him to truly succeed. You have made it impossible for him to become his own man." He picked up a loose stone from the bottom of the boat, turning it over and over in his calloused fingers. "You didn't just co-sign a loan for that house, Gideon," he said, his voice dropping. "You built your son a beautiful gilded cage. It's a lovely cage, mind you, all glass and steel with a great view. You furnished it for him. You made sure the heat was always on, and you made damn sure the landlord, the bank, was always paid so he'd never have to worry about being evicted." He looked me straight in the eye, and his words hit me with the force of a physical blow. "And now your boy is sitting in that cage with his pretty little bird, Ashley. And he thinks he's the king of the world. He thinks he's an eagle, but he's just a canary who has never known a day of hunger, who has never had to face a storm. He doesn't even know he's in a cage because he's never, not once, had to test the bars. He's never had to try and fly on his own." He tossed the stone into the water, the small splash echoing in the cove. "And his wife, she's not just in the cage with him. She's the one who's constantly redecorating it, demanding it be made bigger, more expensive, more impressive to the other birds. She loves the cage. She just doesn't like the old working-class man who built it hanging around and reminding her that it's all a gift. She wants to believe she earned it." Everything he said was the truth, a brutal, ugly, and undeniable truth. I had been the architect of my own son's weakness. My love had been his crutch for so long that he had forgotten how to walk. "So, you keep asking what you're going to do," Jamal said, his voice softening slightly. "And the answer is the hardest one of all for a man like you. You are going to do nothing. You stop. You stop paying for the cage. You stop delivering the seed and the fresh water every month. You are going to open the door, step back, and you are going to let that bird see if he has the wings to fly or if he's just going to sit on his perch and chirp until he gets hungry." "He'll fall, Jamal," I whispered, the father in me crying out in protest. "He'll fall, and she'll never forgive him." "Maybe," Jamal said with a shrug. "Maybe he will. But a man doesn't learn how to get up until he's fallen a few times. You've spent his whole life catching him before he hits the ground. It's time to see if he can learn to get up on his own. Sometimes the greatest act of love is to let your children feel the full, terrifying weight of their own choices." He picked up his fishing rod again. "It's a hard lesson, Gid, for both of you." I sat there, his words echoing in the silence. Stop building the nest. It was so simple and so impossible. It went against every instinct I had. And yet I knew he was right. I had been the unseen pillar. And the only way to see if the house they had built was real was to pull the pillar away and see if it could stand on its own. I picked up my own rod, my movements no longer aimless but deliberate. A decision was forming, a cold, hard, and terrifying decision. "The hardest lessons," I said, my voice a low rumble, "are the ones that stick." Jamal's words hung in the quiet cove as stark and as clear as the winter sky above us. He picked up his fishing rod again, his part in the conversation finished. He had delivered the hard truth as a good friend does, and now he was giving me the silence to let it sink in. I stared at my own fishing line, a thin, nearly invisible thread disappearing into the dark, cold water. For 50 years I had been a thread just like that, a lifeline my parents held, never once wondering if the man on the other end was getting tired, if his own hands were getting raw from the strain. You built your son a beautiful, gilded cage. The metaphor was a cruel one, but it was true. I saw it so clearly now. I had thought I was giving him a foundation, a head start. But I had not given him a floor to stand on. I had given him a safety net that had prevented him from ever learning how to land on his own 2 feet. My help had not been a boost. It had been a barrier to his own growth, his own failures, his own potential manhood. I had been so focused on protecting him from struggle that I had robbed him of the strength that only comes from it. And Ashley. Jamal was right about her too. I had seen her as a difficult, ambitious woman. I had not seen her as the keeper of the cage, the one who polished the golden bars and demanded it be filled with ever more expensive toys, all while resenting the man who was silently paying for it all. She did not want a partner in my son. She wanted an accessory, a provider for a lifestyle she felt she was owed. And I, with my secret, steady stream of money, had been her silent, unknowing accomplice. My mind drifted back again to my Serena, to her quiet, knowing eyes. She had seen the truth not in the numbers like Jamal, but in the character. She will always want more than he can give. My wife's warning and my friend's blunt advice were 2 sides of the same coin. Serena had seen the spiritual rot, the insatiable hunger in Ashley. Jamal had seen the practical consequence, the gilded cage my love had built. They had both seen the truth from their own vantage point. I was the only one standing in the middle, too close, too blinded by a father's love to see the whole picture. Until now. I looked out across the water. The sun was beginning to dip below the tree line, painting the calm surface of the lake in shades of orange and deep purple. A profound, aching sadness settled over me. Sadness for my son's weakness. Sadness for my wife's unheeded wisdom. Sadness for the years I had spent watering a garden of lies. The hurt of the Christmas rejection was still there, but it was changing. It was no longer the hot personal sting of a wound. It was becoming something colder, heavier. It was becoming the weight of a necessary and overdue judgment. Jamal was wrong about one thing. He had said I should burn it all down, but I am not a man who burns things. I am a builder. I spent my life with plumb lines and levels, with blueprints and foundations. I know that when a structure is unsound, you don't always take a torch to it. Sometimes you have to force a correction. You have to expose the faulty foundation, strip it down to the studs, and see if the people living inside have the will to rebuild it on solid ground. And that was it. The decision, when it finally arrived, was not a lightning strike of anger. It was a slow, cold, and quiet settling in my soul. This was not going to be an act of revenge. Revenge was a messy, emotional, and ultimately unsatisfying business. This would be a correction, a precise, methodical, and silent adjustment of reality. I would not yell, I would not accuse, I would not even explain. I would simply withdraw my hand and let the pieces fall where they may. I would let the natural laws of finance, the cold, hard logic of the world they so desperately wanted to be a part of, be the judge and the jury. My son had been living in a house with a crooked foundation. My love, my sacrifice had been the shims and props I had been using for years to keep it level, to keep the cracks from showing. Now I was going to quietly walk into the basement and remove the props, and we would all finally see if the house could stand on its own. I reeled in my line, the motion no longer tired but purposeful. "Let's head back," I said to Jamal, my voice a low, steady thing he had not heard from me all day. "I've got things to do." He looked at me, a long, searching look. He saw the change in my eyes. The hurt was still there, but the indecision was gone. In its place was a cold, calm resolve. He didn't ask what I was going to do. He didn't need to. He just nodded, started the engine, and turned the boat back towards the shore, leaving the last of the evening sun behind us. The quiet conversation I'd had with myself on that park bench was the turning point. The decision once made settled in my soul like a great heavy stone. It wasn't a decision made in anger, but in a kind of profound, weary clarity. The drive home from my fishing trip with Jamal was the first drive in a long time where my mind wasn't racing with worry about my parents or my son, or the endless list of things that needed fixing. It was just quiet. I had a plan now, or rather a plan of inaction, and all I had to do was wait for the calendar to turn. The holidays were a hollow, painful affair. Christmas Day, a day I had once filled with the joy of watching my son and then my granddaughter open their presents, was spent in the echoing silence of my own home. I made myself a simple dinner. I watched an old movie, and I did not allow myself to think about the joyful, noisy celebration happening in the glass house across town, the one I had paid for but was not welcome in. The days between Christmas and New Year's passed in a gray, quiet blur, and then the morning of January 1st arrived, New Year's Day, a day for new beginnings. I woke up at my usual time just as the first faint light of dawn was beginning to creep through my window. I followed my routine, the same routine that had anchored my life for decades. I made a pot of strong black coffee. I sat in my armchair by the window and unfolded the morning paper. The world outside was quiet, sleeping off the celebrations of the night before. Everything was exactly as it should be. Everything was normal, except for the small digital reminder that was scheduled to go off on my phone at 9 a.m. For 5 years, on the first of every month, that reminder would pop up. It was a simple 3-word alarm: transfer mortgage fund. And for 5 years without fail, I would walk over to my small desk, log into my bank account, and transfer the thousands of dollars necessary to cover my son's mortgage into the special account the bank would then draw from. It was a habit as ingrained as brushing my teeth. At precisely 9 o'clock, my phone, which was sitting on the end table beside me, chimed. The notification glowed on the screen. Transfer mortgage fund. My body reacted before my mind did. My muscles tensed. My hand almost reached for the phone. The 50 years of conditioning as a dutiful son, a provider, a fixer, surging through me. A voice in my head, a voice that sounded a lot like my mother, whispered, "Just do it, Isaiah. It's easier. Don't make waves. They're your family." I felt a familiar, crushing wave of guilt. What if Jamal was wrong? What if they really were in trouble? What if this was the one act that would break my family and my daughter's heart beyond repair? My hand trembled slightly. The old Isaiah, the good son, was fighting a war with the new one, the man who knew the truth. I closed my eyes. I pictured the deed of release, its cold official language, a stark contrast to my mother's warm, pleading voice. I pictured the airline tickets to Hawaii. I pictured the receipts from fancy restaurants. I pictured my wife Simone, her sad, wise eyes looking at me across our porch, a woman who had seen the truth and had loved me enough to try and warn me. I opened my eyes. The battle was over. The good son had lost. With a slow, deliberate movement that felt more significant than any check I had ever signed, I reached for my phone. I didn't open the banking app. I simply placed my thumb on the notification, the one that read, "Transfer mortgage fund," and I swiped it away. I dismissed it. The screen went back to showing the time and the date. It was done, or rather, it was not done. The silence in the room felt different now. It was no longer the silence of a man waiting. It was the silence of a man who had acted. A quiet, invisible bomb had been detonated, and the shockwave was now traveling across the city silently towards my son's beautiful glass house. I finished my coffee. I read the rest of the newspaper. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel angry. I felt only a great, hollow sense of finality. Later that afternoon, I drove to the cemetery. I stood before Serena's grave, a simple granite stone that I kept clean of leaves and debris. "I finally did it, Serena," I whispered to the cold stone, the words forming small white clouds in the winter air. "I finally stopped building the nest. I hope you'd be proud." As the sun began to set on the first day of the new year, I drove home. The transfer had not been made. The pillar, the unseen pillar that had been holding up my son's entire world, had been quietly removed. I did not know exactly what would happen next or when, but I knew for the first time in my life that I was no longer responsible for catching the pieces when they began to fall. The period of my quiet sacrifice was over. The period of their loud consequences had just begun. Christmas Day arrived not with the joyful ringing of bells, but with a profound and heavy silence. I woke up in my own bed in my own quiet house for the first time on Christmas morning in over 40 years. The traditions that had been the scaffolding of my life were gone. There was no excited chatter from a young Malik, no smell of Serena's sweet potato pie baking in the oven, no rustle of wrapping paper. There was only the low hum of the refrigerator and the gray December light filtering through the blinds. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat in my armchair, the one that still held the faint scent of my wife's perfume if I closed my eyes and tried hard enough. I did not allow myself to feel the full weight of the sorrow. To do so would have been to drown. Instead, I treated the day like any other. I read the newspaper. I worked on a small carving in my shop, the familiar feel of the wood and the tools a small solid comfort. But the ghosts of Christmases past were everywhere. I saw the ghost of my 6-year-old son proudly placing the lopsided clay star he'd made on the tree. I saw the ghost of my wife, her face lit with a warm, beautiful glow as she watched him. The house was not empty. It was full of memories, and their presence was a quiet, constant ache. I knew that across town in the glass house I had paid for a different kind of Christmas was unfolding. A loud, bright, and perfect Christmas filled with the laughter of Ashley's family. A Christmas where my absence was not a hole, but a relief. A necessary subtraction to make the picture complete. The thought was a cold, hard stone in the pit of my stomach, but I did not let it break me. I had made my decision. This loneliness was the price. The new year came and went. January settled over the city, a month of cold rains and quiet introspection. And on the first of the month, for the first time in 5 years, I did nothing. The automatic reminder on my phone chimed and was dismissed. The transfer was not made. The pillar was removed. And then I waited. The first ripple of the consequences was, I'm sure, almost invisible. It would have arrived around the 15th of January, a single unassuming envelope in the stack of mail at my son's house. It was a standard computer-generated letter from the bank's mortgage division. I can picture the scene perfectly. Malik, busy with his work, would have barely glanced at it. It would have been Ashley who opened it, her perfectly manicured nails slitting the envelope with casual impatience. I imagine she would have read the first line, "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Vance. This is a friendly reminder that your mortgage payment due on the first of the month has not yet been received." Her first reaction would not have been panic. It would have been annoyance, a deep, profound annoyance that the orderly, perfect world she had so carefully constructed had been momentarily disrupted by such a trivial, bureaucratic error. "Malik, honey," she would have called out, her voice dripping with condescension, "the bank is being ridiculous again." She would have shown him the letter, and he, trusting the automatic system I had set up, would have agreed with her. "It must be a computer glitch," he'd say. "Their systems are always messing up. I'm sure it will sort itself out." And with that, Ashley would have done the one thing that made this whole catastrophe possible. She would have taken that letter, that first gentle warning shot, and she would have crumpled it up and tossed it into the trash with the junk mail and the empty shopping bags. It was an act of supreme, arrogant confidence. In her world, problems like this didn't happen to people like her. They were inconveniences, administrative errors to be ignored. They were not real. She had dismissed the first tremor, completely unaware that it was the prelude to an earthquake. February arrived cold and bleak. In my house, the silence continued. I had not heard a word from my son since the Christmas phone call. My quiet withdrawal from his life had been met with his own. He was giving me a taste of my own medicine, I supposed. A silent, childish standoff. He was waiting for me to break to apologize for whatever crime he and his wife had decided I had committed. He had no idea that the ground beneath his feet was already beginning to crumble. The second ripple arrived in the first week of February, and this one was not so easy to ignore. It was another envelope from the bank, but this one was different. It was a larger, heavier envelope, and across the front in a stark red all-caps font were the words, "Second notice, immediate attention required." This letter, I know, would not have been so easily dismissed. This was not a friendly reminder. The language inside would have been sharp legal and stripped of all pleasantries. It would have spoken of default. It would have mentioned late fees and penalties. And it would have included a clear, stark warning: failure to remit payment within 30 days will result in your account being reported to all major credit bureaus and may result in the initiation of foreclosure proceedings. This time, when Ashley read it, the annoyance would have been tinged with the first cold flicker of real fear. This was not a glitch. A glitch does not send a second, more threatening letter. She would have shown it to Malik, her voice a little sharper, a little less confident. "Malik, you need to call them. Now. This is ridiculous. What is wrong with these people?" Malik, his own confidence shaken, would have spent an hour on the phone being transferred from one department to another, a faceless voice in a corporate labyrinth. He would have finally reached someone in the mortgage department who would tell him the same maddeningly simple thing: the payment due on January 1st had been rejected because the originating account had insufficient funds. The payment due on February 1st had been rejected for the same reason. "That's impossible," he would have yelled into the phone. "I'm looking at my business account right now. The money is there." He was looking at the wrong account. He had always been looking at the wrong account. The bank representative, unable to discuss the details of a third-party account my account could only repeat, "Sir, I'm sorry. The funds were not available. You are now 60 days past due." The fear was real now. The foundation was shaking. But the true public humiliation, the first crack in the beautiful glass facade of their life, was still to come. It came a few days later on a bright, cold Saturday afternoon. Ashley, as she often did, had decided to engage in some retail therapy. She was at Phipps Plaza, the most exclusive mall in Atlanta, a temple of high fashion and luxury. She was in her favorite boutique, a place where the salespeople knew her by name and always had a glass of champagne waiting for her. She had picked out a new handbag, a ridiculously expensive piece of Italian leather that cost more than my first car. It was her reward to herself for enduring the stress of the bank's incompetence. She had glided to the counter, placing the handbag down with the casual air of a woman for whom money was an abstract concept. She pulled out her Platinum American Express card, the symbol of her status, the key to her kingdom. She handed it to the salesperson. The salesperson swiped the card. And then the moment every performer dreads. The moment the illusion shatters. The polite smile on the salesperson's face faltered. She looked at the small screen, her brow furrowing in confusion. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice a low, embarrassed whisper. "It seems there's a problem with the card." Ashley laughed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. "A problem? That's impossible. Try it again." The salesperson tried it again. The result was the same. A small but impeccably dressed line was forming behind Ashley. The other patrons were beginning to stare. "Ma'am," the salesperson whispered, her face now flushing with discomfort. "It's still not going through. It says, card declined." The words hit Ashley with the force of a physical blow. Declined her card. The one linked to the supposedly bottomless well of their success. It was an impossibility. It was a public and deeply personal insult. Her face, I can only imagine, went from a mask of casual arrogance to a canvas of pure, horrified humiliation. The other women in the store were watching her, their eyes a mixture of pity and a delicious, satisfying dose of schadenfreude. "There must be a mistake," she stammered, fumbling in her purse for another card. She tried a second one, declined. She tried a third, declined. In the middle of that temple of wealth, surrounded by the very symbols of the status she had sacrificed everything for, Ashley was publicly unmasked. The invisible financial safety net that had supported her high-flying life had just vanished, leaving her in a freefall. She had to leave the handbag on the counter. She had to perform the walk of shame out of the boutique past the staring, judging eyes of her peers, her face burning with a shame so profound it was a physical pain. The dream was beginning to crack, and for the first time the whole world could see it. The quiet confidence my parents had lived in for a week shattered the moment my mother walked out of that grocery store, her face burning with public shame. I was told that when she got home, she threw her purse on the floor so hard that its expensive contents spilled across the kitchen tiles. The mask of the sweet, gentle matriarch was gone, replaced by a face of pure reptilian fury. She was not just embarrassed, she was terrified. The invisible net that had always been there to catch her had just been ripped away, and she was in a free fall. Malik was at his home office desk trying to close a deal on the phone when she stormed in. He saw her face and immediately ended his call. The story came out in a torrent of angry, humiliated words. The declined cards, the smirking looks from the other women in line, the indignity of having to abandon a full cart of groceries. "It's your father, Malik," she had shrieked, her voice a sharp, ugly thing he had never heard from her before. "This is his doing. This is some kind of sick, cruel game he's playing because of that Christmas nonsense." Malik, I imagine, was caught in the crossfire. He looked at his mother's furious, panicked face, and then at the 2 threatening letters from the bank that now sat on the corner of his desk like unexploded bombs. He was a logical man, a man who built his career on solving problems. And this was a problem he did not understand. A declined credit card and 2 default notices were not a game, and they were signs of the catastrophic failure somewhere deep in the financial engine of his life. His wife's anger was a storm, but the letters on his desk were the earthquake beneath his feet. "Let me call the bank," he had said, his voice strained, trying to be the calm, competent man he always projected himself to be. "I will sort this out." That phone call to the bank was, I believe, the beginning of his true unraveling. He spent the better part of 2 hours on the phone that afternoon. I can picture him pacing his beautiful minimalist office, the view of the Atlanta skyline outside his window, a mocking testament to a success that was suddenly feeling very fragile. He would have been put on hold, the terrible tinny music a soundtrack to his growing anxiety. He would have been transferred from the credit card department, who could only tell him the account was frozen due to non-payment, to the mortgage department, who could only talk about the default. He was a man used to being in charge, a man whose questions were always answered. But the bank was a faceless bureaucratic wall. Finally, after being transferred for a 4th time, he reached a senior representative in the loan servicing department. "Look," Malik had pleaded, his frustration boiling over. "My name is Malik Vance. My automatic mortgage payment has apparently failed for 2 months in a row. My business account has more than enough to cover it. I need to know why your system is failing." The woman on the other end was polite, professional, and utterly unhelpful. "I understand your frustration, sir," she had said in a calm, practiced monotone. "I'm looking at your file. The automatic debit for your mortgage was indeed rejected on January 1st and February 1st. "Yes, I know that," Malik said through gritted teeth. "Why?" "It was rejected by the originating bank, sir," she replied. "The reason given was insufficient funds." "That is impossible," Malik yelled, his voice echoing in the quiet office. "I am the originating bank. The money comes from my business account at this very bank. I can see the balance right now." There was a pause and the sound of typing. "Sir," the woman said, her voice still maddeningly calm, "I have no record of a scheduled automatic debit from your business account for this mortgage. The payment authorization on file is linked to a different account number, a dedicated escrow account. That is the account that is reporting insufficient funds." Malik stood there, the phone pressed to his ear, his mind scrambling to make sense of her words. A different account number. A dedicated escrow account. It was like she was speaking a foreign language. He had signed the papers 5 years ago. He had assumed with the easy confidence of a busy and successful man that it was all being handled. The idea that his mortgage, the single biggest financial obligation of his life, was being paid from an account he knew nothing about was an impossibility. It broke the laws of financial physics. I don't understand," he had stammered. "What account? Whose account?" "I'm sorry, sir," the woman said, the final brutal wall of corporate policy descending. "Due to privacy regulations, I am not authorized to discuss the details of a third-party account. I can only tell you that the authorized payment method on your file has failed. You are currently 60 days in default. I would strongly advise you to rectify the situation." And with that, the call was over. Malik hung up the phone, his mind a maelstrom of confusion and a new terrifying dread. A mystery account, insufficient funds, a 60-day default. And then in the middle of that chaos, a single clear thought emerged, an instinct born of a lifetime of conditioning. When you are in trouble, you cannot understand when you are lost in the woods. You call the one person who has always known the way out. You call your father. Without even thinking, his thumb found my contact in his phone. "Dad." He pressed the call button, his heart pounding with a desperate childish hope that my voice, my calm, steady, problem-solving voice, would make sense of this madness. He listened as the phone rang, the familiar ringtone, now a beacon of hope in a rising sea of panic. It rang once, twice, 3 times, and then it went to voicemail. My voice, my calm recorded greeting, was a shock to his system. I always answered. Always. Especially when he called. He hung up without leaving a message, a feeling of deep, primal unease settling over him. He told himself I was probably just in my woodshop, that I couldn't hear the phone. He waited a few minutes and called again. Voicemail. He left a message this time, his voice tight. "Dad, it's Malik. Call me as soon as you get this. It's an emergency." An hour passed. The quiet in their house was heavy, menacing. Ashley was watching him, her earlier fury now replaced by a wide-eyed fear. "What is going on, Malik?" she whispered. "Why isn't he answering?" Her fear fed his. His annoyance at my silence began to curdle into a frantic, clawing desperation. He called again. Voicemail. He sent a text. "Dad, where are you? This is serious. Call me." The message sat there delivered but unread. He called again, and again. He began to pace the length of the living room, the phone a permanent extension of his hand. With each unanswered call, each trip to my recorded voicemail, his panic grew. He felt like a man in a locked room dialing the one phone number he had that was supposed to be a direct line to the fire department, only to discover that the line had been cut. Ashley, seeing his unraveling, grabbed her own phone and started calling me too. Their quiet, perfect house was now filled with the sound of two people, a husband and a wife, frantically, desperately calling the same number over and over again, their combined panic and confusion growing with every unanswered ring. They were completely and utterly powerless, and for the first time in their perfect, curated lives, the one person who was supposed to fix everything was gone. The humiliation Ashley suffered at the mall was the spark that lit the fuse. The panic that had been a quiet, creeping unease in their house for weeks now exploded into a full-blown crisis. My son Malik, a man who had built his entire identity on the image of calm, competent success, was now faced with a problem he could not solve, a fire he could not put out. His wife was furious, his bank was sending threatening letters, and the very foundation of his life was shaking. He did what any logical man would do. He went to the source. He decided to confront the bank. That phone call, I believe, was the beginning of his true unraveling. He spent the better part of 2 hours on the phone that afternoon. I can picture him pacing his beautiful, minimalist office, the view of the Atlanta skyline outside his window, a mocking testament to a success that was suddenly feeling very fragile. He would have been put on hold, the terrible tinny music a soundtrack to his growing anxiety. He would have been transferred from the credit card department, who could only tell him Ashley's account was frozen due to non-payment on their mortgage, to the mortgage department, who could only talk about the default. He was a man used to being in charge, a man whose questions were always answered. But the bank was a faceless, bureaucratic wall. Finally, after being transferred for a fourth time, he reached a senior representative in the loan servicing department. "Look," Malik had pleaded, his frustration boiling over. "My name is Malik Vance. My automatic mortgage payment has apparently failed for 2 months in a row. My business account has more than enough to cover it. I need to know why your system is failing." The woman on the other end was polite, professional, and utterly unhelpful. "I understand your frustration, sir," she had said in a calm, practiced monotone. "I'm looking at your file. The automatic debit for your mortgage was indeed rejected on January 1st and February 1st. "Yes, I know that," Malik said through gritted teeth. "Why?" "It was rejected by the originating bank, sir," she replied. "The reason given was insufficient funds." "That is impossible," he must have yelled, his voice echoing in the quiet office. "I am the originating bank. The money comes from my business account at this very bank. I can see the balance right now." There was a pause and the sound of typing. "Sir," the woman said, her voice still maddeningly calm, "I have no record of a scheduled automatic debit from your business account for this mortgage. The payment authorization on file is linked to a different account number, a dedicated escrow account. That is the account that is reporting insufficient funds." Malik stood there, the phone pressed to his ear, his mind scrambling to make sense of her words. A different account number, a dedicated escrow account. It was like she was speaking a foreign language. He had signed the papers 5 years ago. He had assumed, with the easy confidence of a busy and successful man, that it was all being handled. The idea that his mortgage, the single biggest financial obligation of his life, was being paid from an account he knew nothing about was an impossibility. It broke the laws of financial physics. I don't understand," he had stammered. "What account? Whose account?" "I'm sorry, sir." The woman said, the final brutal wall of corporate policy descending. "Due to privacy regulations, I am not authorized to discuss the details of a third-party account. I can only tell you that the authorized payment method on your file has failed. You are now 60 days past due. I would strongly advise you to rectify the situation." And with that, the call was over. Malik hung up the phone, his mind a maelstrom of confusion and a new, terrifying dread. A mystery account. Insufficient funds. A 60-day default. And then in the middle of that chaos, a single clear thought emerged, an instinct born of a lifetime of conditioning. When you are in trouble, you cannot understand. When you are lost in the woods, you call the one person who has always known the way out. You call your father. Without even thinking, his thumb found my contact in his phone. "Dad." He pressed the call button, his heart pounding with a desperate, childish hope that my voice, my calm, steady, problem-solving voice, would make sense of this madness. He listened as the phone rang, the familiar ringtone, now a beacon of hope in a rising sea of panic. It rang once, twice, 3 times, and then it went to voicemail. My voice, my calm, recorded greeting was a shock to his system. I always answered, always, especially when he called. He hung up without leaving a message, a feeling of deep, primal unease settling over him. He told himself I was probably just in my wood shop, that I couldn't hear the phone. He waited a few minutes and called again. Voicemail. He left a message. This time, his voice tight. "Dad, it's Malik. Call me. As soon as you get this. It's an emergency." An hour passed. The quiet in their house was heavy, menacing. Ashley was watching him, her earlier fury now replaced by a wide-eyed fear. "What is going on, Malik?" she whispered. "Why isn't he answering?" Her fear fed his. His annoyance at my silence began to curdle into a frantic, clawing desperation. He called again. Voicemail. He sent a text. "Dad, where are you? This is serious. Call me." The message sat there delivered but unread. He called again and again. He began to pace the length of the living room, the phone a permanent extension of his hand. With each unanswered call, each trip to my recorded voicemail, his panic grew. He felt like a man in a locked room, dialing the one phone number he had that was supposed to be a direct line to the fire department, only to discover that the line had been cut. Ashley, seeing his unraveling, grabbed her own phone and started calling me too. Their quiet, perfect house was now filled with the sound of 2 people, a husband and a wife, frantically, desperately calling the same number over and over again, their combined panic and confusion growing with every unanswered ring. The calls became a blur of desperation, a digital scream into the void. In total, I was told they called 28 times that evening. 28 pleas for help. 28 demands for an answer. 28 moments of dawning horror as they realized their lifeline was gone. As the evening wore on, Malik's frantic energy burned itself out, leaving behind a hollow, terrifying exhaustion. He sat on his $1,000 Italian sofa, the 2 red-lettered warnings from the bank on the coffee table in front of him, his silent phone beside them. He was a man adrift in a sea of questions he couldn't answer. A mystery bank account, a mortgage that had apparently been paying itself for 5 years, and a father, the most reliable and constant force in his entire life, who had suddenly, inexplicably vanished. He tried to think logically. When did this all start? The first letter from the bank had arrived in mid-January, a few weeks after Christmas, a few weeks after that cold, shameful phone call where he had uninvited his own father from the holiday. He had thought it was a temporary, awkward moment. He had told himself his father would get over it. But what if he hadn't? The thought, once it entered his mind, was a chilling one. Was this a coincidence, or was this a consequence? Was his father's silence not a sign of absence, but a form of action? The idea was so alien, so contrary to the man he knew his father to be, that he couldn't fully grasp it. But the seed of a terrible suspicion had been planted. He was a man with a puzzle, and he knew with a certainty that terrified him that his father was the only one who held the missing piece. The night wore on. The unanswered calls were a testament to his powerlessness. He looked at Ashley, who was curled up on the other end of the sofa, her face pale with a fear she could no longer hide behind anger. He looked at the bank notices. He looked at his silent phone. He knew he couldn't fix this over the phone. He couldn't fix this with an email. He couldn't fix this by pretending it was a glitch. There was only one path forward. "I'm going over there," he said, his voice a raw, exhausted whisper. Ashley didn't argue. There were no arguments left. He stood up the movement of a man who was tired beyond measure and picked up his car keys. The drive across town to my quiet, modest neighborhood was not a drive of anger like my daughter's had been in the previous story. It was a drive of pure, desperate fear. A drive of a man who was finally, after 42 years, about to ask a question to which he was terrified to hear the answer. The drive to my house was, I imagine, a torment for my son. He was a man caught between 2 impossible realities. In one, the world was orderly and his success was his own, which meant the bank's threats were an inexplicable, terrifying glitch. In the other, the bank was right. And the only explanation was that his father, the most reliable man he had ever known, was somehow involved a thought so alien it was almost unthinkable. He was driving not to find a solution but to find a reality he could stand on. I heard his car pull into the driveway, the sound of tires on gravel, too fast, too frantic. I heard the car door slam. A moment later, he was at my front door, not knocking, but pounding his fist against the solid wood, the sound of frantic, desperate drumbeat. I was in my armchair, a book open in my lap, though I hadn't read a word in hours. I was simply waiting. I stood up slowly, my old bones aching with a weariness that had nothing to do with age, and I opened the door. He looked terrible. His face was pale and drawn, his eyes wide with a frantic, sleepless energy. The confident, successful CEO was gone, replaced by a terrified son who had lost his way. He pushed past me into the house, running a hand through his hair. "Dad," he began, his voice a raw, ragged thing. "What is going on? I've been calling you for days. Days. The bank is sending letters threatening to foreclose. Ashley's card was declined. She's a wreck. The whole world is falling apart and you won't even answer your phone. You have to tell me what's happening." He was pleading, demanding, accusing, all in the same breath. It was the desperate, chaotic energy of a man who has lost all control. I listened to his entire frantic speech, my expression unchanged. I let the storm of his panic break against the wall of my calm. When he was finally finished, his chest heaving, I simply looked at him. "Son," I said, my voice quiet and even, "you need to take a deep breath. You are talking about your bank, your mortgage, your wife's credit card. These are your affairs, Malik. What do they have to do with me?" He stared at me, his mouth agape, a look of pure, uncomprehending disbelief on his face. "What do they have to do with you?" he repeated, his voice incredulous. "What are you talking about, Dad? I have been on the phone with the bank for hours. They're talking about some mystery escrow account, a payment that has been failing for 2 months. They say the payment is linked to an account that isn't mine. And this all started right after Christmas, right after our phone call." The connection was there on the tip of his tongue, a terrible suspicion he was afraid to speak aloud. I saw the flicker of dawning, horrified understanding in his eyes. He was close. But I could not be the one to give him the answer. He had to find it himself. To hear it from me would be to see it as an attack and accusation. To find it himself would be to see it as the truth. "I cannot answer questions about your finances, Malik," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. I stood up and walked slowly toward the front door, a clear signal that this visit was coming to an end. "You are a 42-year-old man. You are the CEO of your own company. You are responsible for your own house." He followed me, his face a mask of desperate confusion. "But I don't understand, Dad. Please just tell me what to do." I stopped at the door and turned to face him. The time for anger was past. The time for pity was not yet here. This was the time for the hard, painful lesson. "I will not tell you what to do," I said, "but I will ask you a question. You're a smart man, you're a problem solver. Your wife tells me you're a genius, so solve this problem." I held his gaze, my eyes unwavering. "Go home. Sit down at that expensive computer in your fancy office and answer one simple question for me, a question I know you haven't asked yourself in a very long time. When was the last time you personally looked at a detailed line-by-line bank statement for the account your mortgage was supposed to be paid from?" He stared at me, the question hanging in the air between us, a stark and terrible challenge. He had no answer. He knew, and I knew that the answer was never. "You want to know what's going on?" I said, my voice dropping to a low, somber tone. "The answer isn't in my house, son. It's in yours. It's been there all along. You just never bothered to look." I opened the door for him. He stood on the threshold for a moment, his mind reeling. Then he turned and walked away, not with anger, but with the stunned, stumbling gait of a man who has just been told the world is not what he thought it was. The drive home for him, I imagine, was a silent torment. My question would have echoed in his head, a relentless, accusing drumbeat. When was the last time you looked? He was a man who prided himself on his intelligence, on his attention to detail in his business. But he was being forced to confront a terrible truth. He had been completely, utterly, and negligently blind to the single most important detail of his own life. My calm was the most unsettling part. A guilty man would have been defensive. An ignorant man would have been confused. My calm was the calm of a man who knew the answer, a man who was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. He walked into his house and Ashley was on him in an instant. "Well," she demanded, her voice sharp with anxiety. "What did he say? Is he going to fix it? Is he going to call the bank?" Malik, I was told, just shook his head, his eyes having a distant, haunted look. He said it's our problem," he mumbled, walking past her towards their home office. "He told me to look at our bank statements." Ashley's reaction was predictable, a short, sharp, incredulous laugh. "Our bank statements? What is he talking about? This is his fault, some mess he's made, and he's telling us to look at our statements. That ridiculous, stubborn old man." She was still trying to cast me as the villain, the source of the problem. But Malik was no longer listening to her. My question had taken root in his mind, a seed of doubt that was now sprouting into a tree of terrible certainty. He sat down in front of his sleek, expensive computer, the very symbol of the success he had been projecting to the world. And he knew with a certainty that made his stomach turn to ice that this machine was about to show him the truth of what a fraud that success really was. "We're looking," he said to Ashley, his voice a low, determined command. She stood behind him, her arms crossed, still fuming, as his fingers, trembling slightly, began to type the website of their bank. He entered his username. He entered his password. The screen loaded, welcoming him to his online portal, a place he had not truly visited in 5 long years. He navigated to the documents section, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't click on the mortgage account. He clicked on his and Ashley's main joint checking account, the one where his income was deposited. The one he had always assumed was paying for everything. He scrolled down to the previous month, January, and he clicked the link. "Download PDF statement." The file downloaded. He clicked to open it, and as the document loaded on the screen, a long, damning list of debits and credits, I imagined the world stopped. He held the mouse, his finger poised over the scroll wheel, a man on the edge of a cliff about to finally look down. The PDF of their joint checking account statement loaded onto the screen, a stark black and white document that held the truth of their lives. I can picture them, my son and his wife, leaning in their faces, illuminated by the cold glow of the monitor. The air in their expensive home office would have been thick with a tension so profound it was almost a sound. Malik, I imagine, was the one controlling the mouse. His hand, usually so steady, would have been trembling slightly. He didn't scroll. He was a man of efficiency, even in a crisis. He used the search function. He typed in the name of the mortgage company. The computer whirred for a fraction of a second. A small pop-up appeared on the screen. "No results found, Ashley." I'm sure let out a short, sharp breath. "That's impossible. You must have spelled it wrong." "I didn't spell it wrong, Ashley," Malik would have said, his voice a low, tight thing. He tried again this time, searching for the exact dollar amount of the mortgage payment, a number that should have been seared into their memory but had become a forgotten detail. $4,821. He typed in the number. Again, the same result. No results found. A cold, creeping dread must have begun to wash over them. "Check another month." Ashley would have insisted, her voice a little too high, a little too brittle. "Check last quarter. It must be a glitch for this month." Malik, his movements now stiff and robotic, navigated back to the document portal. He downloaded the statement from 3 months prior. He ran the same searches. No results found. He went back 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5. With every new search, with every new glaring, no results found. The silence in the room would have grown heavier, more menacing. It was not a glitch. It was a pattern, a perfect, unbroken 5-year pattern of absence. The single largest, most significant expense of their lives, the very payment that kept the roof over their heads, had never once been debited from their account. They would have pushed back from the desk the truth of it, too vast, too impossible to comprehend all at once. For 5 years, their life had been a magic trick. They had been living in a beautiful house, driving expensive cars, taking European vacations, all under the assumption that they were paying their own way, that their success was real. But the numbers on the screen did not lie. The numbers screamed that it was all an illusion. The foundation of their life was a mystery. And then, in the deafening silence of that office, the central, terrifying question would have finally surfaced. "If we didn't pay it," Malik would have whispered, his voice hoarse. Then who did? His own mind, a mind he had always trusted, would have begun a frantic, desperate search for an answer. and it would have found one piecing together the clues that had been laid right in front of him. The bank representative's strange, confusing words, a different account number, a dedicated escrow account, his father's calm, unshakable demeanor in the face of his panic, and his father's final cryptic question, a question that now echoed in his head with the terrible clarity of a judge's final verdict. When was the last time you looked? He would have looked at Ashley, his eyes wide with a dawning, soul-shattering horror, and he would have said the words that would bring their entire world crashing down. "My dad," he would have breathed. "Oh my God, Ashley, it was my dad. The special arrangement. He never stopped. He's been paying it. He's been paying it all this time." The full, staggering weight of the truth would have hit them then. The number itself, nearly $300,000 over 5 years, was an avalanche bearing them in a debt of gratitude so immense it was suffocating. They were not the masters of their own success. They were not the self-made power couple they had pretended to be. They were charity cases. They were dependents living in a house owned in every way that truly mattered by the very man they had just banished from their lives. Their beautiful, curated life was not an achievement. It was a gift, a secret, silent, and incredibly heavy gift. And for Ashley, that was the one truth she could not, would not accept. Her entire identity, her sense of self-worth was built on the idea that she had earned this life, that her taste and her ambition had manifested this reality. The revelation that she was living on the charity of her working-class father-in-law was an intolerable humiliation. Her mind, in a brilliant and desperate act of self-preservation, twisted the truth. It reframed the narrative not to accept her own blindness, but to find a villain she could blame. Her face, which had been pale with shock, would have flushed with a sudden hot rage. A gift. She would have spat her voice a low, venomous hiss. That wasn't a gift, Malik. That was a trap. Don't you see? Your father did this on purpose. This was never about helping us. This was about controlling us. She would have been pacing now, her mind constructing a new, more palatable fiction. He wanted us to be dependent on him. He wanted to hold this over our heads forever, the perfect, benevolent patriarch. He never wanted you to be your own man, to be more successful than he was. He set this whole thing up, this special arrangement, and he was just waiting for the perfect moment to pull the rug out from under us to prove that we couldn't survive without him. The Christmas thing, that was just his excuse. This is all his fault. He is a cruel, manipulative, and controlling old man. She was not just angry. She was absolving herself. She was rewriting history in real time, transforming my act of profound, misguided love into a sinister, calculated plot. She was turning me into the monster because the only other option was to look in the mirror and see her own reflection, a grateful, indebted daughter-in-law. And that was a role she refused to play. But Malik, I imagine, was not listening to her. Her angry, hissing words would have been nothing more than a distant, meaningless noise. He was not looking for a villain to blame. He had already found one, and it was himself. He wasn't hearing Ashley's voice. He was hearing his own from that cold, shameful phone call just before Christmas. "Just for this year, Dad. I'm so sorry." He was picturing my face not as a manipulator, but as a father. A father who had worked his entire life with his hands, a man who deserved a peaceful, unburdened retirement. A father who had instead spent the last 5 years of that retirement secretly carrying the single biggest financial weight of his son's life, just so that son could play at being a big shot. And what had he done to repay that silent, monumental sacrifice? He had told that man he wasn't welcome in his home for Christmas. He had treated him as an inconvenience, a social embarrassment to be managed for the sake of his wife's superficial plans. The hypocrisy of it, the profound, staggering cruelty of his own actions, hit him with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't just embarrassed. He was broken. The pride he had felt in his business, in his beautiful house, and the life he thought he had built, all of it dissolved, leaving behind only a deep, profound, and bottomless well of shame. He was a fraud. Not in the way Ethan from the previous story was a fraud, a man who stole from others. Malik was a fraud in a way that was almost worse. He was a man who had stolen from himself, who had traded his own integrity for a beautiful illusion, an illusion he had allowed his own father to pay for. He would have slumped into his expensive office chair, the very symbol of his false success, and buried his face in his hands. The sounds that came from him would not have been angry shouts. They would have been the quiet, ragged, and utterly broken sobs of a man who has just been forced to see the true pathetic measure of himself. He was not the victim of a cruel father. He was the ungrateful son. And that simple, terrible realization was his complete and total undoing. The week that followed the disastrous dinner was a week of profound and absolute silence. It was a silence I had initiated, a weapon I had chosen, but now it was a shared space, a desolate landscape where our family used to be. I did not call. They did not call. The lines of communication which had once been so full of lies and pleas were now simply dead. I spent the week in my wood shop, the familiar ritual of measuring, cutting, and shaping wood, the only thing that made sense in a world that had lost all its form. I was not angry anymore. The fire had burned itself out, leaving behind only the cold gray ash of a grief too deep for tears. Then, on a Saturday afternoon, exactly 1 week after the reckoning, I heard a car pull into my driveway. It was not the hurried, frantic arrival of the week before. The engine cut out, and for a long time there was only silence. Finally, a car door opened and closed, with a soft, hesitant click. I looked out the shop window and saw my son Malik walking slowly towards my front door. He was alone. He looked like a different man. The sharp, confident posture of the successful CEO was gone, replaced by the slumped, weary shoulders of a man carrying an invisible, crushing weight. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He looked, for the first time in a very long time, like a man who was utterly and completely lost. He didn't use his key. He stood on my front porch for a moment, gathering himself, and then he knocked. A quiet, tentative, and respectful knock. It was the knock of a visitor, not a son. It was the sound of a new beginning. I opened the door, and we just stood there for a moment, two strangers who had known each other for a lifetime. "Dad," he said, his voice a raw, broken whisper. Can I come in?" I stepped aside and let him pass. He walked into the living room, a room he had once filled with the noisy, vibrant energy of a growing boy, and now he seemed to shrink in its quiet stillness. He didn't sit down. He just stood in the middle of the room, looking at his own feet, a man on trial about to deliver his final confession. "I don't even know where to begin." He started, his voice thick with a shame so profound it was painful to witness. "I'm sorry, it's not enough. I know it's not enough, but it's all I have." He finally looked up at me, and his eyes were full of a raw, unshielded pain. "I'm sorry for the phone call. For Christmas. It was a cowardly, shameful thing to do. There's no excuse for it. None." He took a ragged breath. "But that's not the real thing I'm sorry for. I'm sorry because I was blind. I was so caught up in the dream and the image and the life that Ashley and I were building that I never stopped to look at the foundation. I never stopped to see that you were the one holding it all up." He gestured vaguely, as if the walls of my small house were a cage. "I spent the last week going through everything. The statements, the numbers, 5 years. 5 years you carried us. You carried me. You paid for my dream, Dad, and I didn't even have the decency to thank you for it. I didn't even have the decency to know about it, because I was too busy, too proud, too arrogant to look. I was too busy pretending I had earned it all myself." He was crying now, not the loud, performative tears of my father, but the silent, hot, and shameful tears of a man who has just been forced to see his own reflection for the first time and is horrified by what he sees. "You gave me everything," he whispered. "And I threw you away for a holiday party. I threw you away because your presence made my wife feel uncomfortable. I failed you, as a man and as a son. I failed you. And I am so, so sorry." He finished his apology hanging in the quiet room, a raw and honest thing. The old me, the father who couldn't bear to see his son in pain, would have rushed to comfort him. Would have said, "It's okay, son, I forgive you." Would have smoothed it all over and put the broken pieces back together. But I was not that man anymore. That man's foolish, unconditional forgiveness was what had allowed this rot to grow in the first place. I walked over to the armchair and sat down, a signal that this was not a moment for an easy embrace. "I hear you, son," I said, my voice even the voice of a judge who has heard a defendant's plea. "And I believe that you are sorry. Your sorrow is real. I can see it." He looked at me, a flicker of hope in his tear-filled eyes, but I could not give him what he wanted. Not yet. But your sorrow doesn't change the facts, Malik. I continued, my voice calm but unyielding. You and your wife built a life on a lie that I, in my own foolishness, made possible. That house you live in, it's not a home, it's a stage. It's a prop in a play about a successful man you have not yet become, and the performance is over. I let the words settle as hard and as heavy as stones. An apology is just a word, Malik. True repentance, true change, is an action. You cannot stand here in my house and tell me you are a new man and then drive back to your glass castle and continue living the same lie. You cannot have it both ways. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the old oak tree in my front yard, its branches bare against the winter sky. You have to choose, I said, my back to him. You have to choose what kind of man you want to be from this day forward. Do you want to be the man who lives in a beautiful house that is a monument to deception, a man propped up by his father's sacrifice and his wife's ambition? Or do you want to be the man who builds his own life, however small, however humble, on a foundation of truth? He was silent. I could feel the weight of my question, the weight of his entire future pressing down on him. If you are truly sorry, I said, turning to face him, if you truly want to build something real between us again, then you will take action. You will sell that house. You will pay off the debts you have incurred. You will downsize. You and your wife will learn to live within your own means. You will prove to me, and more importantly to yourself, that your character is more valuable to you than your image. I saw the conflict in his eyes, the terrible war between his shame and his life with Ashley. I know this will not be easy, I said, my voice softening just a little. I know your wife will fight you on this. She loves the cage, and that son is the real test. You have to decide who you are. Are you a man who stands for what is right even when it is hard? Or are you a husband who enables a fantasy because you are afraid of the conflict? Your entire future rests on the answer to that question. I had laid it all out. The choice was his. The path to redemption was clear, but it was a hard, steep, and painful path. The choice is yours, Malik, I said, my voice quiet but absolute. You can have a relationship with your father, a new one built on honesty and mutual respect. Or you can have your beautiful house and all the lies that come with it. You cannot have both. I walked back to my armchair and sat down, picking up my book, a clear sign that the conversation was over. I was leaving him alone with the hardest and most important decision of his life. The choice I had given my son was a heavy one, and I knew it. In the weeks that followed our last painful conversation, a new kind of silence settled between us. It was not the angry, wounded silence of the holidays. It was a silence of deliberation, of a man wrestling with the entire foundation of his life. I did not call him. I did not press him. I had delivered my ultimatum, a hard and bitter pill, and I knew that he had to be the one to choose to swallow it. To force him would be to repeat the same mistakes I had made my whole life, propping him up, making the decisions for him. This had to be his. I spent those weeks in a state of quiet, anxious limbo. I worked in my shop, the familiar scrape of a hand plane on a piece of wood, the only thing that could quiet the noise in my own head. Had I been too harsh? Had I pushed him too far? Broken the final fragile thread that connected us? Every time the phone rang, my heart would seize, half hoping it was him, half terrified of what he would say. But the call never came. The silence stretched. The truth, when it finally revealed itself, did not come from a phone call. It came from a sign. I had a doctor's appointment on the north side of town, and on the drive home, a detour for road construction forced me off my usual route and onto a street I had been subconsciously avoiding for months. It was his street. The street of beautiful manicured lawns and houses that looked more like corporate headquarters than family homes. My heart began to pound, a slow, heavy rhythm as I drove down the wide, clean asphalt. I told myself not to look. I told myself to just keep driving. But I couldn't. My eyes were drawn as if by a magnet to the lot on the top of the hill. And there it was, his house. The monument of glass and steel, the symbol of my son's ambition and my own foolish sacrifice. And hammered into the center of its perfect emerald green lawn was a sign. The colors were a garish red and white, a splash of ugly commercial reality on the pristine landscape. The letters were large, black, and brutally clear. For sale. I pulled my truck over to the curb, my hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. I just stared. The sign was not just a piece of plastic and wood, it was a public declaration, a white flag of surrender, a tombstone for a dream. The life that Ashley and Malik had so carefully constructed, the illusion of effortless success they had projected to the world, was now officially publicly for sale. I should have felt a sense of triumph. I should have felt the satisfaction of a man whose hard justice had been served. But I didn't. As I sat there looking at that sign, the only thing I felt was a profound and aching sadness. It was sadness for my son, for the public failure he was now being forced to endure. It was sadness for the dream, however misguided, that had now died. A father, no matter how wronged, never truly takes joy in his son's defeat. But beneath the sadness, something else was there. A small, quiet, and steady feeling of grim rightness. This was the correction. This was the necessary demolition of a structure built on a faulty foundation. I, a man of brick and wood and solid ground, had always known that a house like that, a house built of pride and illusion, could not stand forever. Now the demolition had begun. It was a painful necessary, and in its own terrible way, a beautiful thing to see. This was not the end. This was the beginning of building something real. That evening, as I was sitting in my kitchen, my phone finally rang. The caller ID was a name I had not seen in months. Malik. I answered, my heart a nervous drum against my ribs. "Dad," he said. His voice was different. It was not the angry, panicked voice of our last encounter. It was not the ashamed, broken whisper of his apology. It was a new voice, a voice that was tired, weary, and stripped of all its former arrogance. But underneath the weariness, there was a new note of quiet, steady resolve. It was the voice of a man. "I saw the sign, son," I said softly. "I figured you might," he replied, a humorless chuckle in his voice. "It's hard to miss." He paused, and I could hear him take a deep breath. I wanted you to hear it from me. We're selling the house. I made my choice." The words, when they came, were not a victory cry for me. They were a statement of his own agency, his own decision. "It's the right choice, Malik," I said. "It's the only choice." He corrected me, and in that simple correction I heard a universe of change. He was no longer a victim of circumstance. He was a man taking responsibility. "It's going to be a long road, Dad. Ashley is, well, she's not happy, but she'll have to live with it. We both will. We have to." "How are you holding up?" I asked the question of a father, not a judge. There was another long pause. "I'm tired," he said, the honesty of it a raw and beautiful thing. "But for the first time in a long time, I feel like I can breathe, like I'm finally standing on solid ground." We didn't say much more after that. We didn't need to. The most important things had been said. He had made his choice. He had chosen the hard, painful, and honest path. He had chosen his father. He had chosen himself. When I hung up the phone, the sadness in my heart had not disappeared, but it was now joined by something else, something I had not allowed myself to feel for a very long time. It was a small, fragile, and tentative flicker of hope. The painful surgery had been a success. The patient was going to survive. The sale of the house was a quiet, unceremonious affair. There was no dramatic auction on the courthouse steps. Just a private sale handled quickly by a real estate agent who I'm sure was eager to get his commission and move on. I saw in the public records that it sold for a little less than they had paid for it, the price of a market that had cooled, and a seller who was desperate. The proceeds, a substantial sum, vanished almost immediately, swallowed whole by the massive home equity line of credit they had been living on for 5 years. When the bank had taken its full legal share, there was very little left. The choice I had given my son, the choice between his father and the lie, had been made. But every choice has consequences, and the consequences for Malik and Ashley were swift and brutal. They had to downsize. And the word downsize is a gentle corporate term for what was in reality a complete and total dismantling of the life they had built. I learned about it in bits and pieces, in the quiet, hesitant phone calls Malik and I started to have. The Italian leather sofa, the one Ashley had said was an essential statement piece, was sold for a fraction of its original price on an online marketplace. The massive glass-topped dining table that could seat 12 was sold to a young couple who were thrilled with the bargain. The second car, Ashley's expensive white SUV, was returned to the leasing company. One by one, they sold off the props from their stage, the physical symbols of a success that had never been real. Their new home was a two-bedroom apartment in a large, anonymous complex in a part of town they once would have considered a transitional neighborhood. The panoramic view of the city skyline was replaced by a view of the parking lot and the dumpster. The spacious open-plan living area was replaced by small boxy rooms with beige, featureless walls. I imagined Ashley a woman who had built her career on aesthetics and the curation of beautiful spaces, living in that generic, soulless apartment. The irony was as thick as it was painful. The financial pressure was immense. But the real casualty, the real collapse, was their marriage. The entire foundation of their relationship, I came to realize, had been built on a shared ambition, a shared dream of a certain kind of life. They were partners in a joint venture called The Vances, and their primary goal was to project an image of success. Now that the project had failed, now that the image was shattered, they were left looking at each other. Two strangers in a small apartment with nothing left to build. Malik told me about the arguments. They were constant, a low, simmering poison that filled the small space they now shared. Ashley's grief over the loss of their lifestyle had curdled into a bitter, relentless resentment. And that resentment had two primary targets. The first was me. "Your father did this to us," she would hiss at him, her voice a low, angry thing. This was never about love or a lesson. This was about power. He wanted to see you fail. He wanted to prove he was right all along. He is a cruel, selfish old man. But her second target was Malik himself. When her anger at me was exhausted, she would turn it on him. "You let him do this." She would accuse, her voice dripping with a contempt that was, I imagine, 1,000 times more painful than my silence had ever been. "You were weak. A real man would have fought for his family. A real man wouldn't have just rolled over and let his father destroy our lives. You let him win." What she couldn't see, what she refused to see, was that Malik was not trying to win or lose. He was trying for the first time in his life to be honest. "He didn't destroy our life, Ashley," he told me he had said to her one night, his voice weary beyond measure. He just stopped paying for it. The life we were living wasn't real. This is real. This is what we can actually afford." That was the line they could not cross. For Malik, the collapse was a painful but necessary awakening. It was a chance to build something real, something honest. For Ashley, the collapse was a personal failure, an unbearable humiliation. The lie had not been a burden to her. It had been the entire point. And she would not forgive Malik for choosing the truth over the dream. I listened to my son's tired, broken voice over the phone, and my heart ached for him. I had not intended to destroy his marriage. But I had known as Marcus, and I had discussed that their relationship would be tested. The lie had been the glue holding it together. Now that the lie was gone, they had to discover if there was anything of substance left underneath. "I don't know if we're going to make it, Dad," he had confessed to me one evening, his voice a raw whisper. "I don't know if she can ever see this as anything other than a defeat. I don't know if she can ever forgive me for choosing this." "You didn't choose this, son," I told him, my voice soft. "You chose the truth. The rest is just the consequences." He was quiet for a long moment. "I know," he finally said. "And for the first time in a long time, I'm not running from it. I'm just so tired of living in it." The new foundation was being laid, but the ground was shaking and the cost was higher than either of us could have ever imagined. The sale of the glass house was the end of a chapter. It was a loud, public, and necessary full stop on a life that had been built on a lie. The months that followed were a quiet, uncertain epilogue. Malik and Ashley, now living in a small rented apartment, were navigating the wreckage. Their marriage, as Malik had predicted, was strained to the breaking point. Ashley, I gathered, could not let go of her resentment towards me, and more poisonously towards Malik for his weakness. He, in turn, was a man on a slow and painful journey of self-discovery, trying to figure out who he was without the expensive props he had used to define himself for so long. We spoke on the phone occasionally, our conversations brief, functional, and carefully navigated around the vast, unexploded minefield of the past. He was dealing with the last of the legal fallout from the sale. He was trying to keep his business afloat without the facade of success he had once relied upon. He sounded tired, but he never once asked for help. He was carrying his own weight, and in that I saw the first faint glint of the man I had always hoped he would become. Then, one Saturday morning in the early spring, I was out in my backyard surveying the old wooden fence that ran along the back of my property. A hard winter storm had knocked one of the posts loose, and the whole section was leaning at a sad, tired angle. It was a big job for a 75-year-old man, a job I had been putting off. As I stood there planning my work, I heard a car pull into the driveway. It was Malik's truck, an older, more practical model than the luxury car he used to drive. He got out, and he was not the man I had seen in my living room broken by shame. He was not the confident CEO I had known before that. He was someone new. He was wearing old jeans and a faded work shirt, clothes that looked like his, not like a costume. And he was carrying 2 cups of coffee from the little diner down the street. He walked around the side of the house, his steps steady, and handed me one of the cups. "Morning, Dad," he said. His voice was even, the old, desperate edge gone completely. "Morning, son," I said, taking the coffee. It was warm in my hands. He looked past me at the leaning fence. "I was driving by," he said, which was a lie. He lived miles away. But it was a kind lie, a lie of respect. "I saw the back fence took a hit in that last storm. Figured you could use an extra pair of hands to set it right." I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. He was not here to ask for money. He was not here to apologize again. He was here to offer something, his time, his strength, his help. He was coming to me on my own terms, in my own world, a world of work and of fixing what was broken. I took a slow sip of the coffee. "Could always use a strong back," I said with a nod. And that was all that needed to be said. We worked. We spent the entire morning and most of the afternoon together under the cool spring sun. I was the foreman again, and he was the apprentice, just as he had been when he was a boy, learning to use a hammer. We dug out the old rotten post. We cleared the hole. We mixed a bag of concrete in a wheelbarrow, the rhythmic scrape of the shovel a comfortable, familiar sound. There was a time when my son would have considered this work beneath him. Now he worked with a quiet, focused determination, his hands once soft from an office job getting calloused and dirty. And we worked for the most part in silence. But it was not the cold, heavy silence of our recent past. It was a new silence, a comfortable working silence. The kind of silence that exists between 2 men who understand each other without the need for a lot of words. It was the silence of shared labor of a common goal. We were not talking about the past. We were not talking about the betrayal or the lies or the pain. We were building something together, and that was its own kind of conversation. As I watched him work, as I saw the sweat on his brow and the earnest concentration in his eyes, I felt a feeling I had not felt in a long, long time. It was pride. But it was a new kind of pride. It was not the hollow pride I had felt for his fancy house or his big-shot clients. It was a deep, solid pride in his character, in the man who was emerging from the ruins of the boy's ambition. He was learning that a man's worth is not measured by the things he can buy, but by the things he can build, the things he can fix. Late in the afternoon, we set the new post in the fresh concrete, using my old level to make sure it was perfectly, absolutely true. We stood back side by side, looking at the single solid post standing straight and strong in the ground. The rest of the fence was still old and weathered. The relationship between us was still scarred and fragile. But the new foundation had been laid. And it was solid. It was honest. And it was built to last. The last nail was driven as the sun began its slow descent, painting the afternoon sky in soft, forgiving shades of orange and pink. We stood back side by side, 2 tired men covered in a thin layer of sawdust and honest sweat. The fence stood straight and true, a solid, tangible line against the world. The new post, anchored in a deep bed of concrete, was a silent testament to a day of hard, shared labor. It was just a small section of an old fence, but it felt like more. It felt like the first piece of a new foundation. "Looks good," Malik said, his voice a low, weary thing. "Stand straight." "It'll hold," I replied. "It's built on solid ground." The words hung in the air between us, their meaning deeper than just wood and concrete. We packed up the tools in a comfortable, practiced silence. The rhythm of our work had been its own kind of conversation, a wordless communication of shared purpose that had said more than any apology or explanation ever could. When everything was put away, I went inside and came back with 2 tall glasses of iced water. We sat on the back porch steps, the same steps where I had sat with his mother 1,000 times, and we watched the last of the daylight fade. The silence that settled between us now was not the heavy, awkward silence of our first phone calls. It was a new silence, a quiet space of earned exhaustion and mutual unspoken understanding. It was Malik who broke it, his voice thoughtful. "It's funny," he said, staring out at the yard. "For 5 years I lived in a house that was a work of art, a palace made of glass. I never once helped hang a picture frame. Ashley always had a man for that." He took a long drink of water. "I haven't done a day of real physical work since I was a teenager working that summer job with you. I forgot what it feels like, to build something with your own hands, to be tired in your bones but to see what you've made standing right in front of you." "It's honest work," I said. "It has a way of grounding a man." "Yeah," he said with a small, humorless laugh. "Grounded is one word for it." He was quiet for another long moment. I knew the next part was difficult for him. It's been an adjustment for both of us. Living in reality is a lot harder than living in a dream." He didn't have to say her name. Ashley was the unspoken third person in every conversation we had. "She's learning," he said, and the careful, neutral way he chose that word told me everything I needed to know. It spoke of arguments, of tears, of a deep and fundamental divide between two people who were now facing a future they had never planned for. She's learning that a 2-bedroom apartment can't be decorated like a magazine cover. She's learning that a budget isn't a suggestion, it's a boundary. It's hard. For her, the dream was the whole point. I looked at my son. I saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the new lines of worry etched around his mouth. The old me, the fixer, would have wanted to step in to offer advice to help him manage his marriage. But the new me, the man who had learned the terrible cost of enabling, knew that this was his battle to fight. "All a man can do is be a man of his word, son," I said, my voice soft but clear. "You build your own life on a foundation you can trust. The rest will sort itself out, one way or another. People either learn to live in a house built on truth, or they decide they can't, and they leave." He nodded, understanding my meaning completely. He knew I was talking about more than just him and Ashley. I was talking about me. I had decided I could no longer live in the false house of our old relationship. He finished his water and stood up, his muscles groaning in protest. "Well," he said, trying for a smile, "I'd better get going. I'm cooking dinner tonight." The thought of my son, the former CEO, cooking a simple meal in a small apartment kitchen was a more powerful symbol of his changed life than anything else. "You did good work today, son," I said, standing up to face him. "You're an easy foreman to work for," he replied, and for the first time a real, genuine smile touched his lips. There was no big emotional hug. It was still too soon for that. The wounds were still too raw. Instead, he just put a hand on my shoulder, a gesture of a grown man of an equal. "I'll call you next week, Dad," he said. It wasn't a promise born of guilt or obligation. It was a simple statement of fact, a new tradition built on a new foundation. "I'll be here," I said. I watched him walk to his truck and drive away. I stood on my porch for a long time watching his taillights disappear down the street. The ache in my heart for the family we had lost was still there. It would always be there. But as I stood in the quiet twilight, a new feeling was taking its place. It was a feeling of profound and peaceful hope. I had lost the dependent son who had always needed me to fix his problems, the boy who had been so desperate for a life he hadn't earned. But as I watched him drive away, a man going home to cook his own dinner and face his own hard truths, I felt like I was finally, after all these years, getting to meet the man he was always meant to be. And that was a trade I would make every single time. I spent a lifetime building houses for other people, and I nearly let my own family's foundation crumble. My son's Christmas rejection taught me a hard lesson: you cannot demand respect from a place of dependence. My love had become an invisible crutch, and I had to pull it away to see if my son could truly stand on his own. True fatherhood isn't just about providing, it's about knowing when to stop. It's about teaching your children the value of your presence by being willing when necessary to show them the profound weight of your absence. Do you believe a parent's hardest job is knowing when to step back and let their children face their own mistakes? I would be honored to read your perspective in the comments below. And if you believe that real strength is built from struggle, not from comfort, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories.